the public to write the board at mtaboard@sfmta.com or leave messages at 415-646-4470 in advance of meetings. While this technology allows us to hold these meetings via teleconference, it may not be as seamless as we would like it to be. There will be gaps and some dead air in that, so we beg everyone's indulgence, but we think it's important that Muni and this board go about its business and that we have this meeting, and we'll just have to endure the limitations that the technology imposes on us. It sounds like everyone has done this, but to the extent you are participating by phone or otherwise through audio technology remotely, please do mute when you're not speaking so that we don't get background. And then lastly, I do want to say some words of thanks to all the people who've, at least starting with the people who've made this meeting possible. Our board secretary, Roberta Boomer, who's gone through all sorts of efforts to put this together, along with David Copeland, Warren Lamb, Sean Cunningham, Art Wong, Jack Chin from SFGTV, the staff at the Board of Supervisors, our own Caroline and Sophia. A lot of people work to make this happen in this sort of unprecedented time, and it's appreciated. And I will also say to our staff, this is an unprecedented time, and starting all the way from the top with Jeff Tumlin down through the ranks, the response from our agency has been remarkable. And we'll talk about this more as the meeting goes on, but I just want to say thank you. You guys are emblematic of the spirit of our city. So with that, Ms. Boomer, if you would complete this advisory, I would appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. I will continue that under communications. At this point, we'll move on the agenda. Item 3, announcement of prohibition of sound producing devices during the meeting. Actually, there is no prohibition at this time with respect to this meeting. Item 4, approval of the minutes. This is for the minutes of March 17th, regular meeting.
Okay, very good. Board members, as is always, this has been circulated to us in advance. I assume there are no comments, so at this point I will ask first if there is public comment on item 4. Ms. Boomer, do you see any public comment on item 4?
Thank you. Our moderator will check. So if members of the public wish to address the board with regard to the minutes of the March 17th meeting, please dial 10.
Your conference is now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0.
So members of the public, please dial 10 if you wish to address the board with respect to the minutes of the March 17th meeting. Moderator, please let us know when you are ready or whether there are any callers who wish to address.
There are no members of the public that wish to address the board.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing that, we'll close public comment. Unless there are comments from the board, I'll entertain a motion to approve these minutes.
Hold on, Mr. Chair. If we need to close public comment technologically.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
Okay, I got a motion from...
One moment.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Mr. Chairman, you may proceed with the meeting.
Okay, we had a motion from, I believe, Director Torres. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Yes. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
And Mr. Chair, actually, I need to do a roll call vote for every vote.
Okay. Let's make it as snappy as we can.
All right. Thank you. Director Borden.
Here, yes, aye.
Borden present, aye, and Borden present. Director Brinkman.
Aye.
Brinkman present. Director Eakin.
Aye.
Director Heineke.
Aye.
Heineke, aye. Director Hemminger.
Aye.
Hemminger, aye. Director Rubke.
Aye.
Rubke, aye. Director Torres.
Aye.
Torres, aye. Mr. Chair, that is a unanimous approval.
Very good.
Five.
Would you go ahead? Item 5.
All right. Under communications.
Okay. Would you please finish your portion of this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will. Let me get my piece up. All right, so this meeting is being televised by SFGTV. Please be aware that there is a 20 to 30 second time lag. So if members of the public are listening and are watching the meeting, there will be a discrepancy between what you are seeing on SFGTV and what you are hearing. For members of the public who wish to make public comment on items on the agenda, the phone number to use is 888-808-6929. The access code is 9961164. This is the number that is posted on the agenda on our website, and I will repeat it during the meeting. Please make sure that you are in a quiet location, that you turn off any TVs or radios, and if you are live streaming the meeting via SFGTV, that you mute the sound. And this will reduce any reverberation so the board can hear you. At the appropriate time, the chair will ask for the phone lines to be opened. If you wish to comment on the particular item, the chair will prompt you to press 10, the chair or I. This will add you to the speaker line. The auto prompt will say that callers are entering question and answer time, but this is the public comment period. You will be queued up in the order in which you pressed 10. There will be an automated voice that will tell you when it is your turn to speak. When your microphone has been unmuted, you will hear us ask you to state your name and to make your comments. I will start your 2-minute clock when you begin talking. I will say 30 seconds when you have 30 seconds remaining. When your time is up, I will say thank you, next caller, please. At that point, the moderator will put you back on mute. And again, I will repeat the instructions about dialing 1 hour after the phone lines have been opened, as I'm aware that some members of the public may join the meeting late and may not have heard these instructions. Mr. Chair, that concludes communications. Item 6, introduction of new or unfinished business by board members.
Board members, if you would like to speak on this, you can signal through the chat feature that we have. Director Eakin, please.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to raise a thread of thinking that I've been discussing with many of my colleagues, which is just around the idea of when we recover from this crisis, how can we come back even stronger in terms of transportation? And so I think there's sort of at a minimum, there are kind of 2 phases of this challenge. But just wanted to raise that I've observed that both for the phase during this crisis, many cities around the world are creating more space for safe walking and biking to make sure that people have enough space to use those modes of transportation in a way that's also adhering to public health guidelines. And it's been remarkable to see how many cities have acted to make additional space for safe walking and biking. And I want to introduce that theme, that concept to this conversation today. The second, though, is as we think about a recovery, I had a colleague from another city talk about how right now pollution is down, traffic is down, VMT is down. I haven't seen the data, but I would just bet that Vision Zero fatalities and injuries are also down right now. So as we come back from this crisis, how do we make sure we're not going back to an old business as usual that involves people getting injured and getting killed in traffic, that involves transportation being the largest source of greenhouse gas pollution in this country? So that's not something we're going to address or solve today, but I just wanted to raise that thread of thinking, as I think it's really thoughtful in terms of how do we come back in a way that's stronger and more resilient and more equitable than our transportation system was before this crisis.
Wonderful. Thank you, Director Eakin. Certainly look forward to watching you market those ideas, pun fully intended. I don't see anyone else on new or unfinished business. So seeing none, we will move on to the director's report. Director Tumlin, crazy first couple of months for you. You are unflappable. Very, very impressed with how you've been dealing with this. Thank you for keeping us and the city so up to date. Thank you for taking care of our professionals and making sure that they're in the loop and they're looked after. So again, thank you very much. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Director Heineke. Who would have thought that I, as a lifelong transit advocate and promoter of San Francisco, would in my first 120 days in the job be eliminating over 3/4 of our muni lines? and telling people not to ride Muni unless they are an essential worker who does not have another option or somebody who is on an essential trip. Indeed, it is an unprecedented time. So I'd like to review with you the work that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, which feels like it's been about 1.5 years because we've done over 1.5 years worth of work just really in the last 7 days. The theme at SFMTA from the very beginning of this crisis has been one of radical resiliency. We're very fortunate here in San Francisco under the leadership of Mayor London Breed, and especially under the leadership of the San Francisco Department of Public Health under Dr. Grant Colfax, that we've been able to predict what was coming. And the city acted more quickly than most other places. And as a result, San Francisco is in better condition than so many other places around the world. Here at the SFMTA, we closely watched what was happening in Wuhan, and even what was happening in a city like Seattle, which was basically a week ahead of us. San Francisco transmission rates tracked neatly, as well as the public response with those other cities along a very specific timeline. This allowed us to do scenario planning and get ahead of the crisis before it hit us. We knew that things could potentially get very dire indeed. Wuhan shut down their entire public transportation system and was in full lockdown. Our goal was to support the city's efforts in preparing for a shelter in place that didn't involve a complete lockdown. But we didn't know what was coming at us. So we looked very carefully at where were all of the vulnerabilities in our system. So the very first thing that we did was we shut down the cable car and historic streetcar lines. We did this largely to protect our operators. On the historic streetcars and on the cable cars, there's no separate compartment for the operator. And protecting the health of our operators was foremost in our mind. So we shut those down very quickly and did some bus replacement and then waited to see what would happen next. The most painful decision for us next was the decision to shut down the entire rail system. This was hard for us because of the capacity offered by our trains and the relative protection that our trains offer our operators. But our trains are not resilient. We were carefully watching as an increasing number of our workforce was being exposed elsewhere to somebody who was COVID positive and needing to go into quarantine. And then we started getting our first positive test cases at the agency. The rail system was unique in that there are a relatively small number of mission critical positions where if we missed just 1 or 2 of those people, it would have been very difficult for us to recover from a maintenance challenge. Moreover, the maintenance work that is required on our rail system makes it very difficult for our crews to accommodate social distance. So as our ridership was plummeting and as we were preparing for what we knew would likely be worse conditions, we made the decision to shut down the rail system. Also, in order to
hey guys, name's Frank, ready to tell you bottom, love it all, especially love blacks and Latinos, love verbal abuse.
All right, so that was removed. Thank you, SFGovTV. So the decision to shut down the rail system was also really driven by our necessity to increase cleaning crews, reallocate them where they were most needed. Our crews were cleaning enormous empty rail stations. Our downtown transit ridership dropped by over 95%.
I'm masturbating my boycott too, Daddy. I like getting off with older men. I do, sir. I like that.
Please cut that out. Thank you. Is there, SFGov, is there a way of restricting access to this call? Or at least cutting off sound? Well, hopefully you'll be on that. In any event, thank you.
Is this just in any way related to Zoom?
That sliding up in me and sucking on it and licking it, just having the guy totally do me. That was way with me, you know, maybe more than 1, 2 or 3.
This is the problem that Zoom has had throughout the country.
Licking on it. I was just having a big black cock all over me. I've fantasized about this for a long time. Yeah, get back to me.
That we can do with respect to these calls.
Dog shit. I love dog shit.
This is Dovid. I've just unmuted all. Go ahead, Jeff, and unmute yourself, please.
Okay. All right. That's excellent. That should work. So once again, one of the other critical reasons we shut down the rail system was to be able to reallocate our car cleaners and station custodians in order to direct them to do more thorough cleaning for our buses and for our facilities. And in the end, what we realized was that switching to a bus-only system would allow us better than anything to be able to react to whatever this virus threw at us and whatever impact it was going to have on our workforce, because our bus service can expand and contract much more readily. And that certainly prepared us for the news that we were starting to get on Friday of last week, and which really hit home on Saturday of this week. On Saturday, it was looking like, as we made projections, that about 30 to possibly 40% of our workforce was going to be out this week, and that it was going to be impossible for us to predict who was going to not be able to show up. We knew that with a lack of predictability about who was going to be able to show up to our workforce, that our low frequency bus lines were just not going to work anymore. A bus line that runs every 20 or 30 minutes, if we couldn't predict in advance whether our operators would be there, having those services run once an hour was not going to provide a relevant level of service. It was just going to be too unpredictable. So it was on Sunday, just 2 days ago, that our teams made the decision to radically strip down the transit system to just its most essential lines. So the entire transit system, the entire transit team came in early Sunday morning and worked until very late on Sunday night to completely rebuild our entire transit system from scratch. This is work that would normally take years, or at least about 4 months to do. They did in 48 hours. It was an extraordinary effort, and a huge amount of thought went into the decisions about what to cut. We knew that we needed to have a system that was going to be resilient to an unpredictable amount of change. We also knew that we had to direct more service to our highest ridership lines, because we were having a challenge on lines like the 14 Mission, the 38 Erie, the 8 and the 9. We were having problems with passenger crowding and social distance. We were leaving people behind and having more people on our bus than would meet the DPH guidelines. In order to direct more service at the lines that needed it the most, we especially needed to cut basically all of our lower ridership lines. These were painful cuts. So our effort was to look very carefully at the data. We're fortunate that we've got great data at SFMTA. We knew exactly where people were riding and where they weren't. We also knew every line segment that was experiencing crowding. So it was easy for us to identify the highest ridership lines that we needed to bolster and make sure that we never lost. So we stripped everything else out and started there. The next set of analysis was looking at essential services. Where are the hospitals? Where are the critical commercial districts where people are getting their groceries? Where are the supermarkets? And so we layered back in some additional service in order to make sure that critical services were served, at least, like, not necessarily with a bus stop right in front, but within a 10-minute walk of something. The next thing that we did is we looked generally at line spacing to make sure that all neighborhoods were connected, at least at some level. And then most importantly, we ran the whole muni equity strategy to make sure that we were directing the most service to the neighborhoods with people who have the fewest alternative choices. In our wealthier neighborhoods, a loss of transit service means that people can drive, and this is one time. And Director Heineke, we gave you absolution for driving to our last board meeting. We're actually encouraging San Franciscans who can drive to drive, those who can bike to please bike, those who are fit enough to be able to walk, please walk, in order to save critical Muni service for people who have no choice. And that means identifying the parts of San Francisco where people have the fewest choices. So the result of that is the map that we released on Monday and that we're preparing to put into service tomorrow morning. It is grim. And if we can consider this a sign of success, we have heard from people in every single San Francisco neighborhood complaining why their neighborhood was singled out for stripping away service. So we've cut everywhere, but held on to the critical service that San Franciscans most need. We're now today spending a lot of time doing some additional work to figure out what can we do, particularly for elderly people living in hilly neighborhoods where we've removed a lot of service, or people who have a moderate disability who haven't necessarily signed up for our paratransit service, people who who could walk a block to get to transit, but who can't walk 3 or 4 blocks. We're going to be emphasizing our programs in the paratransit program that offer subsidized taxi service, where for $6 you can get $30 worth of cab service, and looking at ways we can expand eligibility and geographic coverage of those programs, not only to serve people who would otherwise be left behind by our Muni service cuts, but also to direct some revenue at our important partners in the taxi cab industry. These will be expensive programs in a time where we're experiencing significant financial losses, but will be helpful to others who are greatly in need, who include our taxi drivers. I should also point out that even though we're making these massive service cuts, these service cuts don't save us money. We're continuing to pay our operators. We provide, as an agency, very generous sick leave benefits to our operators. We want to make sure that our operators who are under self-quarantine or who are feeling sick do not show up at work. Our operators are essential workers, and the majority of them are continuing to go out there and putting themselves at some risk in order to provide this essential service to our public. We're continuing, now that our service is stripped down, we've got better availability of car cleaners. We're continuing to invest in the intensive cleaning that we've been doing from the beginning. We're getting better guidance from DPH on how to do that cleaning in the most effective way, not only for our vehicles, but also for our facilities. We are very fortunate that the global supply chain has loosened up around personal protective equipment. And we're especially grateful for the advocacy by the city's Emergency Operations Center, and particularly Mayor London Breed, who are seeing bus operators and our PCOs and other frontline workers as first responders. So we are getting our crew on the list for additional personal protection equipment, as well as access to early coronavirus testing, as well as access to overnight hotel rooms for people who need to keep working but be in self-quarantine. We're so grateful to the city to be able to offer these benefits to our workers. One of the struggles in all of this has been communicating the intensity of change, both to the public as well as to our workforce. I've been trying to do a 3-minute video directed to our informal workforce or our internal workforce every single day. If you all like, we can send you copies of those. Roberta may have been forwarding them to you. They are our best effort at trying to keep up with the essential news as it arises, and to also create a standard of deep transparency and truth. One thing that we continue to emphasize as an agency is that we can only get through this if we maintain pretty radical transparency and truth, because it's going to require real trust. We're going to have to trust each other, and there's going to have to be trust up and down the chain of command within the organization in order for us to truly come together and make this work. So that's a quick summary of our health and service impacts. As all of you know, this health crisis is also quickly becoming an economic crisis. Well, it's already an economic crisis. Almost all of our sources of revenue, parking, fees, and fines are down to nearly zero. Transit fares are down by about 90%. And our biggest source of revenue, which is the general fund, is being walloped by losses in hotel tax, in the sales tax, and business transfer taxes, and a whole variety of sources. So the work that we're doing now, while at the same time developing this budget, is to figure out how do we deal with our financial reality while minimizing all impacts to our workforce and preparing ourselves and the city for a very rapid recovery. Thanks to Speaker Pelosi's office in particular and all of Congress, we will be receiving a fairly significant amount of money from the most recent federal stimulus package. We are now having conversations with MTC about how to best divvy that up, including posing really uncomfortable questions to the regional agency about to what degree should we divvy up the region's money, assuming each dollar of financial loss should be seen equally across all agencies, versus looking at the financial stimulus, looking at the stimulus package as an opportunity to consider equity in how we spend our money. Specifically, should we be directing more revenue at the agencies that serve passengers who have the fewest choices? All transit properties throughout the region are going to have to make service cuts in order to balance our books. Should we all make the same percentage of service cuts, or should services like Tri-Delta Transit, which carries an overwhelming share of transit-dependent riders, or AC Transit, or the portions of the Muni service like we're operating now, should we look at those as more valuable than transit services that are designed to provide an alternative to driving for people who do have a car? So we are leading that conversation at MTC along with some of our sister agencies about how do we put the system back together again in a way that is more regional, more equitable, and better connected. Other things that we're working on, as two of you directors have already told me, to never waste a crisis. And so there's another opportunity that we're taking advantage of in this crisis, which is to further our efforts at cultural change within the agency. There's nothing like a crisis to bring people together. And many of the previous cultural problems within the agency that got in the way of communication up and down the organizational hierarchy and limited collaboration across silos, that is breaking down. People are having open communication. People are collaborating across silos. People are getting together to offer creative solutions to problems rather than just complaining about the problem and blaming someone else for it. We're also seeing many people stepping it up, going above and beyond the call of duty. 5 of our transit operators, Candace Williams, Oscar Sandoval, Sincere Dow, Ronald Cuenca, and Jimmy Longti, have volunteered to transport persons under investigation and COVID positive individuals for the Department of Public Health. They've been outfitted with full personal protective equipment, but this is work above and beyond the call of duty that reflects the commitment to public service throughout the agency. Taxi drivers like Corey Lamb have been providing abundant access for those with essential needs, including helping people with disabilities. Our paratransit drivers have been focused on helping the hospitals and helping move people with significant disabilities, particularly Mark Soto, who's the general manager of our paratransit services. Our car cleaning crews have stepped up like heroes. Myra Phillips, who oversees that unit, has been being phenomenally adaptive, trying to use her resources for the betterment of the agency. Christina Leong from the Accessible Services Division is volunteering in her neighborhood, connecting residents and the elderly and at-risk neighbors with people who can buy them groceries. Our track crews at MME have been picking up trash have rigged up portable hand washing stations and have been basically offering their MacGyver services to a whole variety of our divisions. Our automotive body and fender worker, Bob Brewer at the Potrero division, has been fabricating and installing new barriers for our storeroom to help with social distancing. We are also coordinating closely with a whole variety of other city departments using our resources in order to help solve problems. Our parking control officers have basically been the handy people for the entire city, being used in all variety of purposes as essential disaster service workers. So that's a very quick summary of a huge amount of work that is going on. And as Director Eakin observed, not only do we want to use the talent of this agency in order to get through this crisis, but we're also committed to and are already starting to think about how do we take advantage of the time period between the shelter-in-place order being lifted and full economic recovery in order to get an enormous amount of work done and set San Francisco up not only for a rapid recovery, but also to be a better city. So our planning and engineering teams are still working hard in this time, developing plans for that unique time period where we'll be able to do substantial work out in our streets, where hopefully we'll be able to get some stimulus money directed at our quick build projects, and where we can take the essential transit network that we've developed right now and ensure that that essential transit network is never again stuck in traffic congestion, and where the traffic signals are designed to prioritize those. We want to make sure that we take advantage of this time period where traffic congestion is light in order to rapidly advance a protected bikeway network in order for San Francisco to join the league of global cities who actually care about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and promoting public health and safety, as well as accommodating what will hopefully be an increase in population and jobs in a more urban and more civil San Francisco. So stay tuned on that. We're hopeful to give you a more formal presentation later. Finally, I just want to close by thanking all of you for your hard work, the way you're working together, the way we're allowing governance to continue and our public bodies to meet despite the shelter-in-place order. And I really, really want to personally thank Mayor London Breed for her efforts to ensure that our frontline workers are treated with the respect that they have earned by showing up and fighting for the city in this time of crisis, and for the ongoing leadership of the Department of Public Health, and particularly Dr. Grant Colfax, who saw this coming and who convinced the mayor and all of the rest of us department heads that listening to the scientists and doctors early in this sci-fi movie was going to be a wise decision. So thank you to all of them. Please get the word out once again that Muni, for the duration of the shelter-in-place order, is only for essential workers and for people making essential trips. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Director Tumlin, for all that you're doing and for that very comprehensive update. Certainly our mayor and I think our former mayor and their leadership in this crisis can be a source for celebration for many San Franciscans. My understanding, Ms. Boomer, is that we have 5 people who would like to provide public comment on Director Tumlin's report. Is that correct? Roberta, you appear to be muted.
Mr. Chair, we have 5 people on the phone line. They may or may not wish to provide public comment. However, at this point, we need a longer pause so our moderator can connect the system in the background, I believe, following the earlier disruptions.
Very good. So we'll wait for that, and board members be advised that once we get public comment, we'll of course turn it over if anyone would like to ask Director Tumlin a question or provide comments on his report. As always, let me know, and you can do so through the chat, as some of you have.
The moderator will let us know when we can continue.
My plan is to wait and not go forward with director comments until we have the public comment, if that's all right.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Boomer, are you in contact with the moderator? Are we confident the moderator knows what's going on?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am in communication with him. So he asks for our continued patience. There is an issue on his end.
Well, if that issue is going to persist for some time, we can proceed with director comments. So is there an ETA on when public comment can be open?
I will ask. Hold on just a moment. All right, Mr. Chair, he needs 5 minutes.
Very good. So Director Rubke, you have a question for Director Tumlin, please proceed.
Thank you. I was wondering, in connection, kind of following up on what Director Egan was referring to earlier, if staff had given any consideration to opening our streets, certain streets, select streets for biking and walking. I think several cities around the globe have done so in this shelter-in-place period. And so I'm just wondering if staff has looked at that as an option.
Yes, so we've been following closely the work that is going on around the world, including many of the, not just the successes of that, but also the failures. New York had a rather tragic failure, not surprising, and their most recent efforts have just been written about. Some of the other cities around the world have had success, but in many ways a problematic success, in that the open streets became an attraction in and of themselves. So here in San Francisco, we've been waiting to see if our efforts to manage the problems that we've been experiencing in Golden Gate Park and Golden Gate Park and at Ocean Beach and Marina Green could be resolved before expanding that line of thinking. So those are questions right now that we're exploring with Rec Park and the whole Emergency Operations Center. Can we learn from the efforts of other cities to create these spaces but manage them in such a way that they don't become too successful, and also manage them, design them in such a way that don't require putting our own workforce at risk or violate the shelter-in-place order because of the amount of management that is required. So stay tuned on that. We'll likely be getting some more answers later this week.
Very good. I am told we are up for public comment. So I know there's a couple directors who have other questions, but let's seize the opportunity and move to the public comment. Reminding folks that this is public comment on Director Tumlin's report only.
So if
Your
moderator,
conference is now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0.
So members of the public who wish to address the board on matters discussed by Director Tumlin, please press 1-0. When it is your turn to speak, the system will prompt you automatically. Moderator, would you please let us know when you are ready? If there are members of the public who will wish address the board under these comments by Director Tumlin, please press 1-0 now.
There are members of the public who wish to address the board.
Thank you. First speaker, please.
You have 2 questions remaining.
Hi, please give us your name and your 2 minutes will start when you start talking.
Hi, my name is Hayden Miller. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you guys for all the work that you're doing during this pandemic. But I just wanted to say that, while what we're doing is great, I think there's potential for improvement. Like AC Transit, they have significantly lower capacity limits on their buses. So I've seen very crowded buses, and so making sure our operators are safe, and maybe also a physical barrier in the front of the bus. AC Transit has used caution tape, so they're still allowing wheelchairs to board through the front of the bus, and just having those seats flipped up and only using them for wheelchairs and then other customers with mobility devices. So protecting our operators, yeah.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, very much. It's good to hear your voice. Ms. Boomer, the next speaker, please.
All right, next caller, please.
You have 4 questions remaining.
Next caller, please.
Hi, this is Jennifer Jory. Hi, this is Jennifer Jory, and I'm calling to make a suggestion to make the muni buses safer. In Taiwan, apparently, they have a clear plastic curtain around the drivers of buses. And I have a longtime professional manufacturer in San Francisco who is willing to make these plastic coverings for the muni bus drivers to make it more safe, and they would be kind of a sealed off area. He really wanted to get this suggestion out there to keep the drivers safer.
Thank you very much for your comment today. Next speaker, please.
Actually, Director, if I may, I'd like to point out that at SFMTA, we're unique in that we do have a plexiglass barrier that does protect our operators. We have made use of these barriers mandatory. We've also looked very carefully at whether we could extend the barriers, but there's no way of doing so without obstructing the operator's vision. So we take our operator health and safety very seriously. It is my top priority.
Great. Ms. Boomer, next speaker, please.
All right, the next speaker, if you'd please state your name and your 2 minutes will start when you start talking.
You have 4 questions remaining.
Next speaker, please start speaking. Give us your name. Your 2 minutes will start when you start speaking. Moderator.
It appears they've dropped off the call.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
You have 3 questions remaining.
Hello, please state your name. Your 2 minutes will start when you begin talking.
Hi, this is Joel Camisher, the school crossing guard. I understand Director Tumlin's decision not to fund our 20-hour program now because of the budget deficit. But as I've said before, I do believe that when this is over, the traffic levels will be very high and that we could use those guards again. I hope there can be found funding, and I'm glad you said in your webinar that we are a beloved group. I hope I am amongst that, even despite my persistent questioning. And I also do believe there are a lot of guards that would want to do that. So thank you and good luck. I don't envy you being in your position that you have to make all the cuts you're making. So I hope we will someday get back to normal. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for participating. You are absolutely a part of the beloved group, and thank you for keeping our children and other pedestrians safe. Ms. Boomer, next speaker, please.
You have 2 questions remaining.
Next speaker, please state your name. We will start your 2 minutes when you begin talking.
Good afternoon. This is Alita Dupree, for the record. Long time no see. Let the record reflect my pronouns are she and her. Concerning this director's report, I have been looking at the maps, and it is concerning to me that the number 28, which runs along 19th Avenue in the Sunset, has been taken out of service. And that's an area with some really steep hills that lead down to Sunset Boulevard, where the 29 runs. Having lived in that area in the past, it's a very difficult climb to go between Sunset and 19th Avenue. So I know that this is a living document, but 19th Avenue is a very busy route, and I hope that when we look at this, we can make sure we serve 19th Avenue to cut down that gap. Other than that, I appreciate all that you're doing, and I look forward to the continuation of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your time today. Ms. Boomer, next speaker, please.
You have 1 question remaining. You have 0 questions remaining.
My name is Herbert Weiner. I am wondering if these cuts aren't a means of balancing the budget. I find these runs are very important to people, and it's causing a real hardship. And I hope these cuts aren't permanent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weiner. It's nice to hear your voice. Be well and safe. Ms. Boomer, is there any other speakers?
If there are additional speakers who wish to speak on this topic, please dial 10 now. Mr. Moderator, are there any additional speakers?
There are no additional speakers for this item.
Very good. Director Heminger.
Hold. If you could please, moderator, if you would please close public comment. I will let the board know when you can proceed.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode. All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Mr. Chair, you are free to continue with the meeting.
Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think one of the key questions we're all wrestling with is whether we're going to go back to normal after this lockdown is over, or whether we're going to go forward to a new normal. And I think the new normal is far more likely if we've got more than one of these lockdowns in our future, and we very well might. Jeff, I know you're worried about 10,000 things, but let me just add one more to the inbox. And that is whether we have succeeded too well in scaring people off the bus. Because I do worry that when the lockdown is lifted, we're going to have difficulty attracting some people back to transit. They're going to associate in their minds distance with safety. And look, transit relies on proximity. That's how it works. So I certainly hope you can do some thinking about that and ways in which we can encourage people to come back. And whether that's cleaning the vehicles, whether that's masking or other protection on the vehicles, whether that's, you know, maybe buying different kinds of vehicles in the long run. If a new normal is what we're exiting to, I think those are really critical questions for us to think about.
Director Hevinger, this is, you're not adding a new item to my list of things to think about. This has been a topic that has been top of mind as we start to think about setting ourselves up for the recovery. And that's going to require not only taking advantage of the post-shelter-in-place order to invest in speed and reliability and quality improvements to transit, but also to think about how we tell stories about transit, about how we celebrate proximity again, because that's going to be necessary not only in order to attract people back to buses, but also to attract people back to restaurants and bars, right? San Francisco thrives because it is sociable. It thrives because it's fun. How do we bring a sense of sociability and civility and fun back to transit and back to the entire city? It will be an essential element of everyone's recovery.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right, Director Torres.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to say thank you for the tremendous leadership that Mayor London Breed has provided our city. It takes a leader to be tested in a time of crisis, and we've seen that she has been and continues to be and fulfills her leadership duties so well. I'm so proud of her. And I'm proud of you, Malcolm, because of the leadership you provided as chair of our board and keeping us together during this very difficult time. And to Jeff, every day I'm reminded what a great decision we made in bringing you on board. So I just want to say thank you to all of our first responders and clearly to all our staff within the agency, our doctors, our hospitals, our nurses, our caretakers. We're all pulling this together, and I think the people of San Francisco appreciate that we may not be able to solve all the problems at once, but at least we're trying the best that we can do as they are in trying to survive during this crisis. So thank you.
Oh, that was very much appreciated and wonderfully said, Senator. That's very gracious of you, and I think you've echoed the thoughts of the entire board. And a thanks to the mayor, and also to Director Tumlin. Director Eakin.
Okay, thank you. I will just pile on my thanks to Director Tumlin for your steadfast leadership during this very, very difficult time. And I thought your report was excellent, so thank you for that. My comment actually, it kind of builds off of both Director Rubke and Director Hemminger's comments. And so it is about open streets and walking and cycling as viable modes of transport. And I think the response you provided, Director Tumlin, regarding concerns about sort of open streets events as sort of recreational and areas of celebration and coming together, I think those are valid concerns. I think what I'm talking about is what we could do to make, especially as building off Director Hemminger's comment, especially as people, even within my own household, you know, I'm hearing comments about concerns about taking transit, you know, in the future from young people. And so given those exist, and given all the excellent data that you spoke about, where we know where people are riding transit, we know where they want to go, we were able to use that data to prioritize certain routes. Have we been able to look at that data about where people want to go and think about the parallel bicycling routes and walking routes that we might be able to expand upon, build, strengthen, create, protect, whatever you want to call it, so that if we're in a place where we either can't take as many people who want to ride the transit routes as we're able to offer. You said people are getting left behind. We're not able to move them all. Or people choose not to ride transit because of concerns right now, real or perceived, that they would have a safe and comfortable for all ages and abilities bicycling or walking experience in parallel to that route. I just think this is a really fascinating opportunity right now to think about how we use that data, so that when we come back, or even now, it's just as safe and comfortable to get on a bike and ride around, or an electric bike to get over some of those hills that one of our commenters was speaking about, as it is to ride the bus.
Yes, so we've got good data about travel patterns, not only for existing bike use, but also where that pent-up demand would be if only there were a safe facility. And in San Francisco, it's not hard because of our topography. And in fact, it's quite fascinating. If you think of San Francisco as predominantly a streetcar city, cable cars shaped a lot of things early, but for the early 20th century, San Francisco's fabric is really a late 19th and early 20th century streetcar city, and bikes have exactly the same grade requirements as streetcars. So the ideal bike network for the city follows the streetcar network of 1940, really. And so thinking about linking up where our neighborhood centers are, all of which are along a former streetcar network, a former streetcar street, and how to connect them together, and how to connect them together in a way that thinks early on about the conflicts between our desire to provide congestion protection for transit, along with a protected bikeway for cyclists. Like, you can't always fit both in the same street. So that is work, well, frankly, that is work that San Francisco has been doing for decades. What I'm looking forward to is the period of time where we can finally implement the work that my predecessors have done, but where the politics are aligning towards being in favor of. And I'm going to be reliant upon all of you to help us with the politics of change. And there will be no better time to do that than in the recovery period, right after shelter in place is lifted, and particularly if we have a relatively modest amount of capital funding to unleash our quick build program to really make both transit and biking and micromobility work in San Francisco.
Great, and just so sort of one final comment on that. To me, there's a material difference between a street like Market Street that we've prioritized for walking, biking, and transit, and a like Valencia Street, Sunday Streets event, which is meant to bring people together and congregate. And I think the public health concerns are associated with the Valencia Open Streets types of events. What I'm very interested in is whether there are opportunities to look at more car-free streets that maintain transit service and achieve your goal of getting those core transit routes always out of traffic, but also provide safe and very low stress bicycling and walking spaces without necessarily the congregation concerns that the public health experts are telling us to have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Eakin. I don't see any other directors who have raised their virtual microphones. And so with that, we will proceed to item number 8, Ms. Boomer. Well, item number 8 is the Citizens Advisory Council report. For some reason, we can't hear from Ms. Boomer, but I will say that we have the report in writing from the Citizens.
Mr. Chair?
Very good.
Sorry. So, Mr. Chair, the Citizens Advisory Council did meet last Thursday, and they have one recommendation for you today. That is, the SFMTA CAC recommends that the fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22 operating and capital consolidated budget proposed as presented to the CAC on that date be adopted. And that is their one recommendation from the meeting.
Very good. Okay, assuming there are no director comments on that, do we have any public comment requests for item number 8, Ms. Boomer?
All right, members of the public, please dial 10 if you wish to make a comment about the CAC's recommendation. When it is your turn to speak, the system will prompt you automatically.
Your conference is now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0.
Mr. Moderator, please let us know when you are ready.
There are no speakers for this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moderator, if you would please close public comment. Mr. Chairman, I will let you know when the meeting may proceed.
Thank you.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
So, Ms.
Very good. Okay.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Mr. Chairman, the meeting can proceed at this point.
Very good. I think we'll pause on public comment on items not on the agenda while we work out some of these technical issues.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we will return to that item. You're moving now onto your consent calendar. These items are considered to be routine unless a member of the public or a member of the board wishes to sever an item and discuss it separately. I will read the items, and please be advised that we do have a request that item 10.2 be severed and considered separately. So your remaining consent calendar, actually, Mr. Chairman, at this point, because we don't know if there's a member of the public who wishes to address the board, I suggest that we pause briefly and ask if there are any members of the public who wish to address the board on a consent calendar item, and then just take their comment then and there.
Very good.
All right. So if the moderator can open the phone line for public comment.
Your conference is now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0.
So this would be public comment on any aspect of item 10.
Yes, on any consent calendar item. This includes the approval of various parking and traffic modifications. We do
Your
know
line
that
is now unmuted.
this also includes 10.2 has been severed. 10.2 has to do with authorizing the MTA to use a joint development procurement method for the Potrero modernization project. Item 10.3 deals with approving the elimination of the 83X Mid-Market Express and the Title 6 service equity analysis of the impacts of eliminating the 83 Mid-Market Express service. Item 10.4 adopts the Muni Equity Strategy Report for fiscal years 2021 and fiscal year 22. If members of the public wish to address the board on any of those items, please dial 10 now.
There are members of the public who wish to address the board.
All right. First speaker, please.
You have 3 questions remaining.
All right. First speaker, please. Please state your name, and we will start your 2 minutes when you start talking. And these are for items on the consent calendar. First speaker, please.
It appears the caller has dropped.
All right. Next speaker, please. If members of the public are on.
You have 1 question remaining.
Yeah, this is Barry, Toronto. I tried to get under public comment. If I may speak under that item, I thought I hit 10. It's not fair. The system is kind of messed up, and it's the first time you're using it under the system. If I
So,
could
Mr.
just
Toronto,
say-
general public comment has not been called. This is on the consent calendar.
What happened? Okay. All right.
The chair has
wait.
has postponed general public comment. Thank you. So members of the public, this is for items on the consent calendar only. Mr. Moderator, are there additional speakers?
You have 0 questions remaining.
Thank you. Please close public comment on the consent calendar items.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode. All participants are now in listen-only mode. Your line is now muted.
Mr. Chairman, you are free to proceed.
Very good. Okay, we have a request to sever item 10.2, which we will address in a moment. If I could entertain a motion on the remainder of the consent calendar.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Very good.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can do a roll call vote, please, for the consent calendar items.
You know, what I might do is let's just, before we go to that, let's just go ahead and see where we end up with 10.2 as well.
All right,
who requested the severance of 10.2?
Director
That's me, Mr. Chairman.
How am I not surprised? It's great to see your face, Steve. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Colleagues, this item is seeking authority for the staff to seek from the Board of Supervisors a project-specific authorization to proceed with a joint development procurement strategy for the Potrero modernization project, which includes the bus facility as well as housing at the same site. My question really is whether we're asking for too little here. You know, given the long list of assets that the MTA has that are, I think, amenable to joint development, it would seem to me it's worth asking, even if we're told no, that we'd like a general grant of authority for MTA to utilize that particular procurement strategy in other locations besides Potrero. A middle ground might be, you know, give us 3 or 4 or 5 slots to use in various projects around the city. So the question is, could we direct staff to seek broader authority or more than one project-specific authority instead of having to return to the Board of Supervisors each and every time?
So I love this question, if I may join in. So the only project that we're ready to move forward on, where we're actually ready to describe a specific construction strategy is Potrero, because that's where we've been doing the most work. Our real estate plan, though, does include looking at additional bus facilities, particularly Presidio and Kirkland, that we would move on to next. So we'd certainly love to take up later to bring to you our overall real estate strategy, as well as get your guidance about how we might be able to advance that strategy more quickly within the staffing constraints that we have as an agency. Now is a particularly good time to take a close look at Muni's real estate holdings, particularly as construction costs come down dramatically and as the possibility of a capital stimulus package is out there, either from the federal government or the state government. This would be a great time for us to literally capitalize upon our capital assets in order to help us both create an ongoing operating revenue stream based upon our real estate assets, but also help us to address the housing shortage that our own workforce experiences. Mayor London Breed has asked us to very much consider dedicating the housing that is built above the Potrero Yard for our workforce, which solves multiple problems all at the same time, including dealing with the fact that some people, even though they know they're moving in on top of a bus yard, may later complain that bus yards are in fact noisy facilities where the buses are coming in very late at night. So I don't know, Director Heminger, does that answer your question? My preference would be to move forward with this item now so that our project doesn't get stuck, and then have you hear later about our overall real estate strategy and provide us direction there.
Well, Jeff, I think I could go along with that because it sounds like we're headed in the same direction. I do think it's going to be worth our while to get a more general or additional projects authorized, or we're just going to get nickel and dimed. And look, we've had a lot of conversation at the board about why does it take so long to do stuff. And one reason it takes so long to do stuff is if you have to go back each time and get a project approved instead of getting 5 approved or a general grant approved. So let's say I recede on this one, and as long as you're committed to coming back with a broader and a more aggressive strategy, I'm all for it.
I really like that idea, and I'm so glad that you are pushing us to do more, to do it better, and to do it more quickly.
Okay, so in light of that, unless there's anyone else who wants to comment on the consent calendar, and I don't see anyone raising their virtual microphones, I'll ask for a motion on the entire consent calendar so we can do one vote for it.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
so very good. Director Torres has moved. Director Heminger is second. Ms. Boomer, please call the roll.
Director Borden. Aye. Borden, aye. Director Brinkman.
Aye.
Brinkman, aye. Director Eakin.
Aye.
Eakin, aye. Director Heinecke.
Aye.
Heinecke, aye. Director Hemminger.
Aye.
Hemminger, aye. Director Rubke.
Aye.
Rubke, aye. Director Torres.
Aye.
Torres, aye. Mr. Chair, you have a unanimous vote.
Very
All right.
good. Item
Moving
11.
Moving on to the regular agenda. Item 11, presentation discussion regarding the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency's fiscal year 2021-2025 capital improvement program in the amount of $2.5 billion for 155 projects within 10 capital programs, including transit reliability, street safety, state of good repair facilities, taxi system safety, and accessibility.
So before I introduce our budget lead, Jonathan Ruers, I just want to point out that our capital budget is very much a part of our resiliency effort in order to weather through the economic impacts of the COVID-19 crisis. Having an adopted capital improvement program sets us up very well for any capital stimulus money that might be thrown at us, whether that's from the federal government, the state government, or anywhere else. This budget, obviously we're not going to spend all this unless the money is in place, but having it adopted provides the framework that allows us to act quickly. So our planning and engineering teams are using this shelter-in-place time to frantically put together shovel-ready projects so that San Francisco can act quickly and grab whatever resources there are available out there. It will be important for us to be ready to receive capital money in order to be able to use that money in order to save our workforce, particularly our planners and engineers who can be funded through capital projects, even if our operating resources are scant. So that's this budget is very much a part of our resilience strategy. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Jonathan Ruers, who can provide a presentation.
Good afternoon, directors. Jonathan Ruers, Senior Budget Manager with the agency. I am going to share my screen so you can see the presentation that we have for you today. This is a follow-up. Hopefully it will pop up in a second for you. There. And I will go into present mode. So this is a follow-up to our budget update in March, in which you asked for a more detailed presentation on our 5-year capital improvement program. So just very quickly, we'll cover the transportation system and its needs in this presentation. We'll cover asset management and how we've taken an asset management approach to the development of our 5-year capital improvement program. And then I'll cover the proposed improvements that are in this current 5-year CIP, which will come forward to you on April 21st for adoption. Just to bring us back, we always start with the SFMTA's 20-year capital plan, which is a financially unconstrained document. This was reviewed by the MTA board last fall. So it's really meant to identify the total needs for the system, so what we're trying to achieve. And at the end of this presentation, I will show you, we sort of grade ourselves on how well we do in each 5-year CIP cycle. We also do it to give a sense to both the public and to our funding partners what the transportation system in San Francisco needs. So this document also feeds into Plan Bay Area within the region, within the Mayor's Transportation Task Force, and within many other planning documents for our federal partners. Just to remind you, the capital plan, our current one is from 2017. In September, the MTA board approved an update in 2019 that wasn't a complete redo, meaning we didn't add a lot of new project or a lot of new program proposals, but we updated the costs and the needs, and we restated some things based on updates that we had within the agency. And moving on to slide 5, the 2017 capital plan had a total need of $21.9 billion identified. In the 2019 capital plan, we had a total need of $30.7 billion, and that was an $8.9 billion increase between the 2 years. I will just state for the record that is unusual, and so we've gotten a lot of questions as to why it increased so much over 2 years. So why did that increase happen? Here are the main core reasons with a little bit of detail here. So with regard to Vision Zero and our street projects, we did an update based on actual costs within the field, and specifically the cost to do major curb-to-curb street projects. So we have done a lot of low-hanging fruit when it comes to Vision Zero, and a lot of the upcoming programs and projects are substantial civil improvements, which are higher cost, which were updated in our capital plan. There was an update to both fleet and facility needs with regard to the conversion to an all-electric fleet. So that was one of the reasons that we saw these needs increase. We are seeing costs increase on traffic signal projects of up to 300%. And so based on our experience over the past 2 years, we wanted to right-size the cost of traffic signal projects, specifically street, signal, and sign-related projects. We increased and looked at our needs with regard to state of good repair for our transit fixed guideway system. That's always something that we look at, state of good repair and those overall needs. So as we had done specific condition assessments, as an example, ultrasonic rail testing that shows us where we need to make improvements on our rail system, we made updates. And then we did want to include, we have not yet completed the Connect SF process, but we know that there are going to be a number of recommendations that are going to come out of Connect SF. Those things that we did know about, i.e. the next step in Muni Forward, we added a total need to account for what we think will be coming forward to you in the future. This next slide, slide 7, shows the total increase. And you'll see, as I've noted, the biggest increase is 100% on streets, 158% on traffic signals, a 31% increase on facilities. I will just highlight those for you on slide 8. So again, this is just a reflection of the total need. We cannot afford $30 billion. We don't have the resources for that, but this helps us both to prioritize strictly at a policy level as to what's important, to clearly communicate the physical needs and the capital improvement needs of the transportation system in San Francisco, and it helps us grade ourselves on how well we're doing using flexible funds or designated funds to meet the needs of San Francisco. So the capital plan is one component we use in the development of the 5-year CIP, again, financially unconstrained. So these are the things based on numerous planning efforts across the agency consolidated that we think the system requires to get it to a system of excellence, as I like to say. So the second element that we use in development of the capital improvement program, and this cycle and post the last federal transportation bill, more and more we're using specific asset management data to make decisions, especially prioritization decisions about investments in the transportation system. So when we are in a fiscally constrained environment, we want to use our asset management concepts and data to make decisions. And year over year, we're getting better and better at doing that. So as an example, in this 5-year capital improvement program, we implemented a condition assessment program. So this takes us beyond just year useful life replacement and total cost, but actually starts to look at the physical condition of those assets, the operational condition in the field. We have since developed a 10-year asset management strategy. So currently we're in the prioritized phase of that strategy where we look at our 5-year capital improvement program and using both the inventory and asset hierarchy and the data we have in place, we make decisions about investments. And then later we will assess the impact of those specific investments on the transportation system. Every year, the SFMTA produces a state of good repair report. The asset management unit is currently in the process of completing our 2019 state of good repair report. And when that's completed, we will bring that forward to the MTA board. But we have completed this report since 2015. And it is, I like to say, it is the state of the practice. And I think we're all very proud of the work that we do in this area. But again, it's that scorecard, essentially, how are we doing with regard to the state of good repair of the assets in the system? So slide 12 covers our score. we use term modeling. So the transit economic requirements model, it was something developed by the FTA. We actually have been using this all the way back to 2010. We break assets up into two specific categories: transit service critical and all other assets for the purposes of performance management. And you'll see all assets to at least the very left on my screen. You will see that between 2014 and 2018, that just regarding all assets, we're staying generally stable. On transit service critical, actually, you'll see a little tip up, but generally our replacement cycles are holding steady. State of good repair is considered generally a term score of 3, 2.5 to 3. You will never have a score of 5. The only time you have a score of 5 is if you buy something brand new and it is new on that very day. So 5 is the highest that you can get. But you will see that because we've been focusing our monetary resources on transit service critical and actually have moved those assets in the right direction, term score wise, all our other assets have seen a score drop. And you will see that that poor column has grown significantly. So I like to say the rich have been getting richer and have been moving in the right direction, but the poor have been getting poorer and poorer a lot more quickly. And so we know that, and we've been looking at the data there. Two specific asset classes in that area are traffic signals. So we are currently doing a condition assessment on that, and our facilities and buildings. And this is why we created the Building Progress Program and why we're working on implementing it right now. You will see here, we also look at our estimated backlog. So we look at those particular capital improvements and assets that are in backlog. We measure that every cycle. So we're in the process of updating that. You will see again, the dark blue on slide 13 reflects the transit service critical assets. So you can see the backlog in replacement, meaning replacing those assets on time. You'll see that growth curve. We've been slowing it. We've been moving in the right direction. But again, the other asset classes you'll see are starting to get bigger and bigger with regard to we're late on replacement. So again, the backlog means the asset is at year 0, meaning the bus has hit year 12 or the piece of rail has hit year 25 and we should replace it, but we didn't. And we're continuing to use that asset. As of 2018, that backlog was 3.13 billion. So we then go on to measure how do we close that and how does that work? We did an update to our methodology in the last State of Good Repair report, which we documented, where we added in an escalation factor. We had been using actual costs for a long time, and we actually didn't consider the cost of escalation in the actual year of replacement. That is a very nerdy statement, but we wanted to be sure to be accurate in the way that we reflected the agency's needs. So when I discuss the capital plan, that reflects all of the agency's capital needs, both state of good repair, enhancing capital assets, and expanding the transportation system. Here you see the measure that we use for strictly state of good repair. We do make a commitment, and I think we're going to hit it, that we try to invest $250 million per year as a base in the state of good repair of the system. If we were to replace our transit service criticals only and replace those on time, we would need $401 million per year. If we didn't want that backlog to grow at all, meaning we would maintain a $3 billion backlog, assets would just circulate in and out, that would require $600 million per year. If we wanted to reduce the backlog by 50%, $678 million. And if we wanted to get to a full state of good repair on every asset we have, eliminate the backlog and replace things on time, it would require $756 million per year. So in the area of capital need and state of good repair, we have very good data that we continue to use in the development of our 5-year capital improvement program. So with that, the 5-year CIP, different from the capital plan, is financially constrained, and it is a financially constrained 5-year program of projects. So it has two functions. One is to serve as our essential capital improvement and project delivery plan for the organization. So we commit to what projects we will be delivering over the next 5 years. We show what phases we will be delivering on, and we prepare the scope, schedules, and budgets for those projects. In addition, a lot of the funding agencies we work with, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the San Francisco Transportation Authority, and the FTA want to see, one, how their dollars are being used, second, how their dollars are being leveraged against other funding sources, and again, how much of their dollars can we use in a particular period of time. So having a very clear fund programming document gives us stable and credibility with these organizations. So when we hold our hand out and say, we need this in this year for this project, we are more successful at securing those additional capital dollars. The CIP on slide 16 is broken up into capital programs, very similar to the capital plan itself. But the reason we really do this is many of our funding sources are restricted to a particular use. The majority of the sales tax that we get from the Transportation Authority is restricted to certain uses. The funds we get through the Federal Transportation Administration are restricted. MTC adds another policy requirement on top of the federal requirements. So we can only use certain dollars in certain ways, and actually the majority of our CIP and capital budget is restricted. So while we have the capital plan and that reflects the optimal way to use our resources and break up the pie, the majority of our funding agencies direct how we might actually use their dollars. Slide 17 includes the revenues that we have included in the capital improvement program. We do include a certain level on the revenue side of competitive grants. We typically look at our prior awards. We assume roughly 80% of the average of those awards over 3 years, and we plug them in. Again, this helps us leverage funds, wisely use local match, and it helps us be more successful when we do prepare those competitive grants. We have included an estimate for Regional Measure 3 based on the $140 million that was expected for San Francisco. We have modified the timing and use of those funds based on the current legal challenges to the RM3 measure, but it is included in the capital improvement program. We've included Proposition D, which was the TNC tax passed in 2019. That includes the $15 million, now only $10.8 million, that we expected for Vision Zero related projects. So the Vision Zero related dollars are in the capital budget. The transit dollars are in the operating budget. We are including an expectation from the transit and intercity rail capacity program of roughly $60 million over the 5-year period. We have been successful getting grants of $20, $30, $40, $50 million related to the light rail replacement project. We anticipate the same, and we've included that. And then funds program through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission through transit capital priorities are also included in the CIP. We did not include the second general obligation bond. We will plan for the next $500 million over the next 2 years, but it is premature prior to an approval by the voters to publicly state any project intent, because CEQA hasn't been completed on some of those projects and the agency's priorities might change over the next 12 months. We are actively working with the San Francisco Transportation Authority on future reauthorization of the Proposition K sales tax. So again, to remind those watching this program and for members of the board, the Proposition K sales tax is a permanent transportation sales tax, but is constrained by a 30-year expenditure plan that goes to 2034. We have financed against the majority of those funds, so we're looking to get a new expenditure plan before the voters. An expenditure plan alone going to the voters would not be a tax increase. It would just be a new expenditure plan. We have held in reserve the ability to do revenue bonds, so we do feel we have the financial capacity, or we did. I might not recommend it in the current environment, but we do have the ability to do revenue bonds to close project gaps if necessary. But we do want to hold that ability, again, in reserve if absolutely necessary. And then we didn't take any action on the FASTER Act or the proposed Regional Measure Act, but we had anticipated and we continue to plan for it, but no project was proposed to be funded, nor do we program dollars against that in the 5-year CIP. So slide 18 specifically, the 5-year CIP is proposed to be $2.48 billion in this cycle. Again, that is lower than prior cycles, just to make that clear. It does include 157 projects. And we haven't really talked about this. This was supposed to be a little more detail, but to help you understand, there are 50 plus sources, discrete sources that have a specific use at a specific time in the 5-year CIP. And so we have an amazing budget office of staff that help develop each of the capital programs with our divisions within the MTA. And to program each dollar to a certain project for a certain use at a certain time absolutely is an art. And we constantly are changing our fund programming. I do think we are some of the best in the region at this, but there are 50 plus sources that we plug into all of the projects that you see in the 5-year CIP. Slide 19 is the roll up. So you'll see where we end up at the $2.484 billion. This is broken up both by capital program and over fiscal years. The adopted 2-year capital budget is the first 2 years of the 5-year CIP. So you will adopt the 5-year CIP as a program. You will adopt the 2-year budget as part of the consolidated 2-year budget approval. We did break out and do the analysis of state of good repair investments. We were able to do that. And I do believe we just get over that $250 million kind of average that we want to have over the 5-year period. At least over the 2 years, we're pretty close, but you'll see it fluctuates year over year, but we really do our best on average to hit that $250 million. Specifically within the 5-year CIP, we had certain priorities we were trying to hit with regard to projects. One was fully funding the Muni Forward Quick Build program. As you recall, that was a recommendation that we proceed with something like that from the Muni Reliability Working Group. We also want to permanently fund the Vision Zero Quick Build program. So when we started it just over a year ago, we used one-time temporary funds. We did some reprogramming and timing changes, actually with the 6th Street project to fund that. We are proposing using the new Proposition D TNC tax to make that a permanent program in the 5-year CIP, so we can make the staff that support that program, the shops, permanent. There are major streetscape projects, and this gets back to the streets line in the capital plan increasing. So again, we've done a lot of that low-hanging fruit with regard to Vision Zero, and now we're getting to extremely complicated and high-dollar street projects. So this is part of the reason our total number of projects has shrunk over a period of time, and we've seen street projects and the street CIP overall grow year after year. So Folsom and Howard, phase 1, we're trying to get phase 2 funded in the future. That'll probably be in our next budget. 6th Street, Taylor Street, and Hyde Street, all significant projects that are ready to proceed in the next 5 years. Fully funding and having a stable funding plan for the LRV replacement and expansion. That is our next $1 billion project. And the staff, both in the transit division and our own budget staff, have been working to have a very stable and complete funding plan for that. The electric bus procurement is also in the CIP. Another one of the recommendations from the Muni Reliability Working Group, fully funding the automatic train control system, or now computer-based train control system, is in the CIP. So another one of those Muni Forward recommendations we were able to include. Better Market Street, phase 1A and phase 1B, what we know as phase 1, is funded in the 5-year CIP. A significant number of Muni Forward projects through the current general obligation bond are funded in the 5-year CIP, as are accessible pedestrian signals. That was another project that we wanted to advance thanks to the voters approving Proposition D last fall. Some things that we were not able to fund, because I know the board has asked me a couple times, what can we not do? So I covered what we could do. So what we do in the 5-year CIP when we can't fully fund a project, we do have a policy that says if we cannot fund 90% of the project because it's fiscally constrained, we will not include it. An alternative to that is to fund phases of a project that allow the project to progress, with the hope that we will find the dollars in the future. It buys us time. And when we have a high level of confidence and we know that project readiness will support us getting those additional dollars, we are willing to take a risk and add a phase, planning phase, completing CEQA documentation, maybe beginning drawings up to 30%. These things only help us advocate for additional dollars. So as an example, if a federal infrastructure stimulus bill were to arise, we would have a number of shovel-ready projects to receive those dollars and to be able to construct quite quickly. So these were the projects where we did that initial investment to get things started, to have our staff work on it, to make it ready. One of those is the Potrero Modernization Project, so something you just heard about. So we will continue on the preliminary engineering of the project and work on getting a developer. On the Presidio Modernization Project, so that reconstruction project, we did receive a grant from Caltrans, so the planning phase for that project will proceed. Folsom Howard bids, phase 2 and 3. While we could not fully fund the construction in the 5-year CIP, we were able to fund the design work to be able to advance that project. Partial funding of the subway mechanical system state of good repair program. So we will do the assessment, we will figure out what the needs are, and we will start building a full capital program around that. Fire life safety, we actually are finishing phase 2 of that. So again, we're going iteratively. We're not going to go through every facility, but we're going to go through as many as we can. And we were able to partially fund the midlife overhauls on the new flyer fleet. We did the best that we can. We'll add more dollars through each cycle, but those vehicles that are coming to their midlife, we will be able to do a midlife overhaul with. So I want to close with kind of the scorecard. So we have this internal analysis we do that we call the weather map. And what we do is we look at the capital plan and we look at our designated funds, the proposed capital improvement program, and we see how well we're doing. How much of our need are we actually able to fund in any cycle? This is often very helpful when we talk to advocates and other groups. So to the very left in the column, you'll see the needs that I showed you previously, the 30.8 billion 2009 capital needs. The next column will show the percentage, meaning of the pie, how much of the need does that particular thing take? So you'll see for the agency, it's facilities, the fleet, streets, and transit optimization and expansion are typically our largest capital programs. The 5-year CIP, so what we do is we kind of look at a 5-year cycle, like what would we need to spend if we were to look at 5 years? So that's about 7 billion if it were all in. The proposed CIP, though, distributes the funds, again, not perfectly based on need, but largely by what our funding agencies are willing to fund. So you'll see what the delta is, the difference between what we want to do and what we can do. So that's the delta. And then you'll see how much of the need we were able to meet in the 5 years. So this ties back to the information I gave you on asset management and focusing on transit service critical assets with our dollars. So you'll see on Transit Fixed Guideway, one of our core state of good repair, one of our core infrastructure elements, we are able to meet almost 90% of the need. You will see on the fleet, minus expansion, which is difficult to fund, and we're partially trying to fund our midlife overhauls. We have never been able to fully fund that. We are able to nearly meet 70% of that need. You'll see in many of the other core street programs, we're able to cover about 25% of the need. But you'll see facilities, again, kind of sticks out there. We're way behind. And that's one of those assets that you see starts growing into the red, that we are just so far behind and we don't have the resources to meet the need. Our state of good repair data starts flagging that we have a problem. So we take all of this data, and it is what we use to develop the 5-year capital improvement program that we present to the board in each cycle. So that is the end of my presentation, and I will stop sharing, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
So thank you, Jonathan, very much. I think the plan is to go to public comment and then ask you for questions. And I know from my screen here that you will have some questions. So Ms. Boomer, if it's all right with you, can we see if there's public comment on this item?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So our moderator will open the phone line for public comment. from members of the public to address the board who wish to address the board on the capital improvement program, please dial 10 now.
Your conference is now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0.
So we'll pause for a moment to allow people to do that. I have gotten an email from a member of the public who says the video coverage is behind about a minute. This is true. SFGTV does lapse from the actual presentation by 20 or 30 seconds, and people should be queuing up now. So, Mr. Moderator, let us know when you are ready.
You have 2 questions remaining.
All right. So, first caller, please give us your name.
Yeah, my name is John McCormick, and I am with the Concerned Citizens for Traffic Safety Action Committee. We are, I represent this group. It is a group of Tenderloin residents who live in the Tenderloin and are concerned about traffic safety issues. And just wanted to comment that in the original CIP before the COVID pandemic, the Tenderloin neighborhood was a high priority neighborhood for the SFMTA, and with $15 million in traffic signal upgrades. And I want to pass along the message from our residents that this number needs to be upgraded even higher. We need more than $7 million for quick builds. This is a neighborhood that is devastated by traffic related deaths, multiple each year. And we need more than just the $7 million. For more than just the quick builds. We'd like to see more money go for raised crosswalks, and other things of that nature. So we ask that the Tenderloin neighborhood is continued to be a priority for the SFMTA, even with a decrease in the budget because of the virus. So thank you for hearing us.
30 seconds.
And please don't forget about the Tenderloin. We need more money than what's already promised. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. You will have 2 minutes.
You have 1 question remaining.
You will have 2 minutes from the time that you state.
Good afternoon, Board of Directors. This is Claire Amable. I'm a community organizer on staff at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. I grew up in the Tenderloin. I live in the South of Market, and much of my work is centered on projects happening in the district. I know firsthand what it's like walking and biking on these streets, what it's like to live in a studio apartment and to rely on street space for open space, and what it's like to get hit by a car crossing the street in front of your own home. I am here today to stand alongside our allies in the TL Traffic Safety Task Force and thanking you for your leadership in prioritizing the Tenderloin with $15 million in traffic signal upgrades and $7.6 million in identified quick builds, the full build out of Taylor Street. And folks in the neighborhood would also like to see some of that money go towards things like raised crosswalks and school signs. As the Tenderloin continues to be ground zero for traffic violence and chronically underinvested in for safe streets, we ask that the Tenderloin neighborhood continues to be a priority for SFMTA, even with a decrease in the budget because of coronavirus. 5 years for this money to roll out is too long of a wait. We have already lost 2 people to traffic violence in the Tenderloin this year, and we ask that projects like the Leavenworth and Golden Gate quick builds happen in 2020 as promised, and that traffic signal upgrades happen before 2024 as part of the city's Vision Zero goal. And lastly, I know that the SFMTA and our city's budget is going to change dramatically given the global pandemic. We know that there will be reduced revenues and so many needs to keep our city functioning and to support recovery. And even if the asks we make today are part of that budget
30
that you
seconds.
approve, the SFMTA may not be able to deliver those things. And with that said, we know that pedestrian and bicycle safety projects are high value, low cost projects to deliver. And as SFMTA reassesses capital priorities in the future, we urge that you make smart, effective decisions to continue funding and building pedestrian and bicycle safety projects and not cutting them. And we look forward to doing this work with you all and with our folks at the TL Task Force towards making streets safer in the Tenderloin. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Boomer, is there any other public comment?
You have 0 questions remaining.
Thank you. Please close. Mr. Chair, there is no more public comment.
Okay, we'll wait for the
If it-
moderator to close the line.
If anyone else wishes to address, please dial 10. We'll just wait for a moment.
There are no additional speakers for this item.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Please close public comment.
All right, with public comment closed, Jonathan, you'll be happy to know there are.
Hold on, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moderator?
All participants are now in interactive talk mode. All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Mr. Chairman, you may now proceed.
Very good. All right, Jonathan, plenty of questions for you, as I'm sure you're not surprised to hear. Director Heminger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jonathan, I've got a question and a comment on slide 19 of yours. I don't know if you can get that back up on the screen. But it has to do with the percentage of our total capital spending on state of good repair. And on that slide, what it shows is that, I believe, if I'm reading it correctly, we're spending about half of our capital money on state of good repair. Is that accurate? Is that correct?
That, yeah, if you just proportion the 1.3 billion out of 2.4, that's about right.
Okay. And so my comment is, and maybe it's part of a question too, you know, when it comes to state of good repair, I'm probably like an eat your peas guy. And I'm wondering whether we're eating enough peas here, because if we're spending half of our capital money on non-state of good repair activities, and we've got, you know, deficits as long as your arm on state of good repair, do you think we're striking the right balance here? Or would you rather see state of good repair move a little bit higher, as probably I would?
I am an eat your peas person as well.
Good
so
man.
I agree with your analysis of the CIP. What I will say is that is largely due again to how the funding agencies tell us the dollars can be used. So a huge component of what we do not include in state of good repair are the enhancement or expansion projects. So we've actually been expanding the fleet a lot lately. So we've been adding more vehicles to the fleet. Most, I would say, and my staff will ping me electronically, but 85% of the street related projects are not state of good repair because they're a new enhancement to that civil infrastructure. So that's another component where the funding is sales tax and other dollars are restricted to that. So we can't redirect those dollars to other things. We have been doing Central Subway and Van Ness. Van Ness has a component of state of good repair with the overhead and the traffic signals, but a lot of that work too is enhancement work. So we're on the back end of a high level of enhancement and expansion projects in the city. I think you will see in the next state of good repair report, the average that we spend on state of good repair is continuing to climb. And we will continue to use that asset management data and direct funds and new sources. For example, when RM3 happened, we put in that source, half was for facilities because we knew we were dying in that area and needed to replace them, state of good repair. The other half was to close the gap on LRV4 and to help with that acceleration to some extent and close the final gap on the expansion. So I agree with eat your peas. I think the data is showing we're moving in the right direction. As new discretionary sources show up, we will continue to use this data to advocate for more dollars to state of good repair.
Good, thank you.
Very good. Director Rubke.
Thank you. I have a kind of a general question about the flexibility of funding as kind of within the fiscal years outlined in the CIP. So I'm just wondering, like, if we have a project that is going to be delayed for some reason, and we have it slated to be funded in FY21, for instance, and then we have another project that's slated for funding in a later year, but that one's also ready to go. Do we have the flexibility to move the funding around so that we can kind of move forward with the project that's ready to go, even though because that funding became available? Or is that not how it works?
No, that's a fantastic question. So I'm going to give a very technical answer to that. Sometimes, but not always. And it gets to that 50 different funding sources that the staff are constantly moving and shaking between projects. So if we can do that and a project is ready earlier, we will attempt to advance the funds to allow for that. If we're restricted, meaning we really can't, like we can't apply for the funds or the federal appropriation won't show up, we're kind of stuck with what we have, so we don't have the ability to do that. But it's the same answer I gave Director Heminger. To the greatest extent possible, when we can be flexible, what we do not want to do, and we make it an absolute policy to do this, we do not want funding or the CIP to be a reason that a project slows down. So we are constantly working, kind of shifting around funding sources to keep things moving.
Great. Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
So I noticed it looks like, to me at least, on page 5 of the overview document and then page 19 of the full funding document, it looks like the equity strategy improvements are funded in FY24 and FY25. And I'm just wondering if it has just that appearance because we're funding components of that strategy as part of other projects that are funded earlier, or if it's the case that it is just funded in FY24 and 25.
My team will buzz me. My first immediate answer to that is that some of it is, so Julie Kirschbaum gave you kind of a presentation on where we stood with that. And you'll remember that she highlighted certain projects and components, specifically some Muni Forward projects, where recommendations from the Muni Equity Strategy are included. Usually when we put a line like that out there in the 24 and 25, it's a placeholder so those dollars could be integrated into other projects once those recommendations are there. So we do want to make sure that if there's a recommendation out of the Muni Equity Strategy, that we have the cash available to augment a project and able to advance those recommendations. So I would, if it were that far out, typically that's the situation, and we have integrated some of that into the earlier project. So you are right in that assumption.
Thank you. And that's all I have.
Very good. Director Eakin.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. I wonder if I could start with just a really high level question. Today we're looking to make final steps on the 1 to 2 year budget to adopt at a later date. We're also adopting this 5-year capital improvement program. I just wonder if you could kind of at a high level just answer what does it really mean for a project to be in this 5-year plan? Because it seems that it takes a step towards becoming more real once we adopt it in the budget. That's like much more firm. But what's really the significance of being in or out of this 5-year document?
That's a great question. So we actually didn't until 10 years ago do a 2-year capital budget. That is strictly the technical administrative appropriation of dollars under the control of the city and county of San Francisco, why we need to do that. And actually, it's only a few of those 50 funding sources that we do that for. Development impact fees, the general obligation bond, our own revenue bond, our city sources, and require it to be appropriated. All of our other sources are actually subject to our independent charter authority. We don't even need to go to the Board of Supervisors for them. And so the 5-year CIP is the all-in. So if a project is in the 5-year CIP, it is literally a guarantee we are going to do it. It provides surety to the funding agencies, like we make a commitment, we have a full funding plan, therefore you can give us this dollar in this year as we advocate for it. It sets our competitive grant strategy, meaning, we're going to put in seed money to start planning or CEQA in order to do a big state ask, for example, on the street side. Often that's the strategy we take. For the sales tax and working with the Transportation Authority, it lays out at project specificity how we're going to use the transportation sales taxes we get from the Transportation Authority. It is our delivery program. So being in the 5-year CIP means that the agency is making that commitment to deliver that project.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then can you just remind us how often it's updated? Is it every couple of years we'll do this again?
Yes, I've already warned my team that in 13 months, we will be going through this cycle yet again. So we update the 5-year CIP as part of every 2-year budget process. So we are constantly updating it.
Okay, great. Because it just seems that there's sort of a bit of a tension between kind of locking in now what we're going to do for the next 5 years, and then the world just changing all the time, even as it's changing with the current situation we're facing. And we've all heard Chair Heineke speak passionately about how Market Street is the beginning of the car-free movement in San Francisco, not the end.
Yes.
I'm not sure I see any other budget in this next 5-year plan for additional car-free streets, such as building off of the success of Market Street. So it seems that there will be things that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet as a board that we will want to do that are not currently contemplated in this plan. So I wonder if you could just speak to the tension. I think addressing Director Ruby's question, you got to this a little bit. As we come up with new priorities, those can make their way into this plan.
That is a fantastic question. So in the resolution, both for the budget and for the 5-year CIP, the board delegates technical adjustment authority to the Director of Transportation. On the capital side of the equation, that authority is delegated from the DOT to the agency's Transportation Capital Committee. Because I just told you it's 50 funding sources, we're constantly moving things around, like figure out a way to do Vision Zero quick build, you know, find $6 million. So like I said, in that particular case, let's use the quick build program. So Tom McGuire came with Jamie Parks with the quick build program. This is what we want to do. Then it comes over to my team and it's like, okay, how do we find $6 million in 2 years to do that? And so we will look at all the projects in the 5-year CIP, in this case, 6th Street. We knew that it was in design and it clearly didn't need 3 million today. So we redirected those dollars so we could start the quick build program. And then we backfilled in this CIP, which you will adopt the 6th Street project and fully funded it. So we are constantly managing the capital program on a monthly basis. What we can do is to give the board a little more transparency on that. We can give you quarterly updates. Usually at the Policy and Governance Committee, we'll give an update on the technical changes. But the CIP, I always tell people this, it is a picture of a moment. The board approves the CIP and does mass changes, you know, multiple hundreds of projects. So we essentially add the last 2 years in any CIP cycle. So we're adding 2 years to the back end. That's usually new or additions, and the board is very involved in that. But we are constantly delaying projects, moving projects, funding new projects. So it's very dynamic, and we do make adjustments for the priorities of the day. I'm happy to give, this is the first time that the board has asked for this much detail on the 5-year CIP. So if you would like, you know, a quarterly update, we can happily do that because we track it very closely.
Okay, great. And then my last question is kind of looking at slide 22, where you lay out in the kind of 4th column over, you lay out the 5-year capital improvement plan needs.
Yes.
And then how that contrasts with the proposed CIP.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could just again kind of remind us how are we defining needs there?
Yes.
Have we, I have to ask the question, I'm sure the answer is yes, but are we looking at the most possible cost-effective version of the projects that are going into this plan, given that, for example, in streets, we're meeting less than a quarter of the need? And is that the need that aligns with our sort of stated goals around Vision Zero and mode share that is in our strategic plan, or is need there defined differently?
I would say the need in the 2019 capital needs column reflects fully implementing Vision Zero. That's what the staff think it will take to get to our policy goal at a physical construction project level. And again, the CIP though is more a reflection of what the funding agencies can tell us we can do. And so we do the decisions we make, and it's the same answer I've given all of you. When we get a discretionary source, we take all of this data and we say, hey, we really need it for this. So as an example, today, Leo Levinson and I were having a conversation with the mayor's office about discretionary funds. We're like Vision Zero Quick Build. This is why we asked for it, because there's no other way for us to fund it. Like our federal dollars can't be used for it. We can't use bus procurement money. We don't have the flexible dollars to do a program like that. The Transportation Authority really likes physical civil improvements, so they get confused about staffing and paint and why are we funding staffing. So we definitely use the 5-year CIP as an advocacy tool. And I think it's been one of the reasons we have been so successful at advocating and getting capital resources. We now want to take kind of the same approach on our operating side, which is why we've been so transparent about need, structural deficit. So we really use it as an advocacy tool to help us fill those gaps.
Thank you.
Very good. All right, Director Borden.
Sorry. Thanks for all your work on this. And I know that it's really hard right now to look at a capital plan when we have so much uncertainty lying ahead. You mentioned the prop K sales tax, and I know that was passed in 2003 for 30 years. Mm-hmm. Are you looking at putting on another measure on sooner than that to kind of address some of the needs that we have from the expenditure plan? What are our immediate plans related to that?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I was on a phone call about that today. We have been advancing the Proposition K sales tax. So we work with the Transportation Authority, and based on needs, we essentially borrow and pay financing to do projects today. And sometimes it's cost effective for us to do that. So in many areas of that sales tax, we've been doing that. So we are getting close in many categories of the sales tax to running out of money. One of the areas we're most worried about is after this fleet procurement, we've used the entire 30 years of sales tax dollars for fleet procurement. So when we start our next replacement cycle, we have no local match to our federal dollars. This is a problem. And we know that, so we're actively working with the Transportation Authority now on a schedule and time to bring reauthorization to the voters, a new expenditure plan for 30 years. We have to assess what the impact will be, like how soon could we get the dollars if we did that? Would we shift dollars in the current expenditure plan now to correct for today's needs? We will be looking at all of that with them probably over the next 12 months. The next scheduled election is June of 2022. That's when we expect to have a general obligation bond on the ballot. That would be a nice, easy election to have an expenditure plan that's, again, no tax increase, plus a GO bond for our needs. The Transportation Authority and we are also asking, if you're going to do that, would you add another half cent like we tried to do with Proposition JK? So over the next 12 months, we will be laser focused on what we're going to do with the sales tax program.
Great, thank you.
Director Brinkman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Heineke. Mr. Brewer, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure to see you come up and present. And I'm reminded once again of how lucky we are to have you and your staff keeping an eye on this and being able to bring it to the public and bring it to us in a way that we can understand. Looking at the 5-year CIP and seeing the Vision Zero quick build in there, I just want a little more clarity based on the first couple of public comments we have is how much flexibility do we have to allocate that across the city based on the need? Is it based on sort of danger? Is it based on density? And how much of it do we base on equity when we decide where that spending is going to go?
So we absolutely did take equity. So there, again, the whole budget process has been based on values. That has been the theme of this budget process. Keeping the system stable and functioning, state of good repair is usually pretty much where we start first. And again, a lot of our funds are designated for that purpose, so that's where they end up. With regard to streets specifically, and those are typically the traffic and signals capital program and the streets program. I know Livable Streets and I know Sustainable Streets Division, they take equity, they take need, they use the data that they get through the Vision Zero process to prioritize the projects that they want to accomplish. I think another thing that we haven't discussed that I do want to bring in there is we also take project delivery into account. How quickly can we get that improvement out on the street to support those who need it? It is a very difficult discussion, and another theme of this budget process, and there will be more, has been trade-offs and decisions. So I think overall, equity, need, collision data, and how soon we can get the improvement out to the public were the key criteria in the decisions that we made.
Good, thank you very much.
I would also let Tom McGuire speak to that if he'd like to add anything to the statement I just made. Okay, put him on the spot.
All right. Well, we'll take Tom's silence as odd impression with your presentation. So take that as the compliment that it is. The one thing I would add, just to echo or follow on some of the comments of Director Eakin, and I know Director Tumlin is looking at this, but fellow directors, when we look at street for, a partial closure to private automobiles, there are two aspects of that. And there is, of course, a very significant capital project that goes along with a project like Market Street. But there also are just interim traffic changes that can be made with less significant capital investments that are more sort of signage and paint and that sort of thing. I'm not saying that's a reason to charge ahead, but, as Director Eakin noted, I do think this is something we should be looking at and something that we can maybe use this current circumstance to explore more fully. And I don't want the rest of you to think that we're necessarily constrained from those changes by capital budgets completely. We can make traffic changes more nimbly to protect pedestrians and promote cycling and walking and that sort of thing. So, Jonathan, as others have said, is a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, as always, for not only doing it so well, but for doing it with such enthusiasm.
Mr. Chair,
yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Mr. McGuire would like somebody to unmute his microphone at this time so that he can contribute to the conversation.
Do I get a say in whether we allow that or not?
Nobody could hear him.
All right, Tom.
He was trying to chime
we'll wait
in.
for you.
I believe that that Director McGuire will have to *6 and unmute himself.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Copeland. I will tell him that.
Okay, so I did *6. Am I unmuted now?
We can hear you, Tom. Go ahead, please.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt the flow there. I just telling Roberta I couldn't chime in at Jonathan's prompt. I actually agree with everything Jonathan said, so I don't have anything to add to this conversation. So, however, I'm sure you'll now I know how to talk later in the meeting when you will need to hear from me. So sorry about breaking the flow there.
Eloquent as always, Mr. McGuire. Okay, I believe that takes us to item number 12, does it not, Ms. Boomer?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it does. Item 12, presentation and discussion of the fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2022 operating and capital budgets, including use of the contingency reserve, proposals on fare policy and pricing, review of new and existing fees and fines, authorizing Sunday and evening parking meter enforcement, and service changes.
And again, we turn it over to our Senior Budget Manager, Jonathan Ruers, who will give a presentation about our latest updates based upon the extensive public comment that we've received, along with your comment at our last board meeting. Jonathan.
Thank you, Director Tumlin. So I am not sharing, so I will just cue the slides as they go through. So just today on slide 2, we just want to cover a couple things, and just for the record, I was incorrect. It is HR 748. We are going to talk about the CARES Act today and how those federal funds will be plugged into the final budget that we will bring before you on April 21st. Today, we just want to cover, as Director Tumlin noted on the next slide, the proposals that we brought forward to you through this budget process. Again, I want to start off by saying this was a very iterative and open process. So one, the values of transparency, We were very clear about what the agency wanted to do in January, what our fiscal status was in January, and what we might be able to accomplish, what the constraints were. So that was January. We then had 2 public hearings, both on fares and then fees and fines and parking policy, to not fully have proposals out there, but to have an open conversation and collaborative conversation with the public about various proposals the agency was considering to balance its budget. So today what we want to do is kind of close that discussion. This is a follow-up to what we talked about on March 17th. These are the final policy proposals that will be baked into the budget, and I'll just quickly cover those. So that is the next slide. That would be slide 4. There we go. So here you will see the original proposals that we had with regard to fares in January. What I do want to note for the board is that the minimal cost programs are built into the board, into the budget. I do want to change free Muni Pass for people facing homelessness. So it is now homelessness, not housing insecurity. So that is also a change to note. But we will be implementing these programs. And that was around the value of access to the system. We had covered our fare policy in February and kind of those high level values that we wanted to achieve. A lot of these had to do with efficiency with regard to access for the riders and promoting greater ridership on the system. A lot of these will move forward. One of the things I do want to talk about is the piloting the monthly fare capping. We will study that as part of moving forward with Clipper 2. So we will continue working on it. We won't do an actual pilot. We will do our best to try to figure out how to make that work. I know that's been a conversation that we've had over the past 2 months. We will look at that, and that's on the table, but pilot was something very specific. I don't know that we're quite ready to do that, but the remainder of these general programs that are low cost will be integrated into the coming years. The next slide presents the fare proposals that we brought forward to you. There was debate and discussion at the board meeting in March. So we are recommending, and is currently built into the budget, that we move forward with the equity Clipper option. So again, this will keep the cash fare at $3. It will reduce the Clipper differential, so it will increase fares on the single ride. But again, we will maintain a discount to support people who want to move to electronic forms of payment. The reduced single fare ride, you'll see there, stays the same. We have included 2 programs, Free Muni for all youth and Free Muni for individuals experiencing homelessness. Free Muni for youth, just to be clear, was based on public feedback that we received, especially from the Youth Commission. And so again, it has to do with opportunity cost, focusing our fare evasion staff on people who should be paying the fare, not creating uncomfortable situations for our youth in San Francisco, and removing the administrative costs of implementing the program. That was feedback we got both from the public and directly from the board, so it just makes sense for us to implement this. We did maintain, there is a slight increase in the Muni Fast Pass that you will also see here. That helps to pay for some of the other programs. So this really has to do with managing discounts across all of our fare media, but we are recommending the equity Clipper option. The next slide, this was another reason that we moved forward with that, was that you will see that the value that we maintain in one of our best products, the Muni Fast Pass, is maintained and actually enhanced through this particular fare proposal. So you will see that the break even is now at 30 trips, even, almost even between both types, depending on the type of fare we have too. You will see that we still remain highly competitive within the region, and we are competitive nationally. So the Muni Fast Pass is a fantastic deal for San Franciscans, and through this particular fare proposal, it is even a better deal. So what we did here was keep the cash fare the same. We did that. We heard, make Muni free for youth and remove that administrative burden and the uncomfortable environment for youth riding our vehicles, whether or not they do or do not, fare evasion situations. We have addressed that particular issue. We changed the Lifeline Pass to be via SSI versus CPI, so using Social Security. So with regard to equity and fairness, but also staying true, which was direction from the board, to our indexing policy, meaning the amount that we are incurring and adding to the budget based on our cost growing, that integrity has been maintained. So we have integrated that into the budget. The next slide covers the parking proposals. Those will be maintained. Those have been generally the same since March. So we will move into extended hours. We will move into Sunday parking. We will again do a specific neighborhood by neighborhood, corridor by corridor approach, working both with members of the Board of Supervisors and working with district merchants. Director Tumlin and I did meet with the Council of District Merchants. We mentioned this. We did not get any significant blowback on the proposal. They understand it, and they understand we will work with them on implementation across the city. So that has been integrated into the budget. Next slide has to do with the tow program. So generally the agreement was to move with option 2, which does remove the administrative fee. We really heard that. We covered the data with regard to who does get towed and when they get towed. And then we also include a low income tow fee there of $100. We reduced the cost for a tow. So that again stayed generally revenue neutral and again focused on equity and impacting those who are experiencing homelessness, because if somebody is living in their car, we do not want to take their home away from them. A new proposal on the next slide added to the budget, and this is in relation to the current situation, is we have built into the budget waiving all taxi fees over the next 2 fiscal years. So the general cost of the fines, if there are fines, will not change, but we have reduced the amount of fees that we expect in the budget. The revenue was roughly $1.6 million in the budget in 2 fiscal years, so now that's going to go down to $200,000, just related to enforcement related revenues. But this was feedback we got directly from the taxi industry, so we have integrated this proposal into the budget. Next slide. So again, these were the solutions that we proposed on the 17th, the fund balance proposal. I will tell you now as a preview that this will change for final adoption on April 21st. We will make some adjustments based on the timing of federal grants we expect to receive from the federal relief bill in the region. Generally, the capital uses will be maintained. So we do need to set aside an $85 million capital contingency. We do need to fully fund the parking meter replacement project. We do have to backfill. So we just covered the 5-year CIP. When we shifted some of those sustainable long-term funds like Proposition B, the general fund set aside, to the operating budget, we did have to backfill with one-time funds, i.e. the fund balance. We did have to close that gap. That does require $10 million. And I'm working with my team specifically on continued improvements across all of our yards for our workforce. $8 million is probably the minimum to continue a successful maintenance campaign program. You saw the state of good repair numbers, you saw the need numbers, but this is the minimum we need to continue to keep our facilities safe and functional for our employees. The next slide includes the proposals that went forward. So in April and maintained includes the things that we are proposing funding in the budget. With regard to these specific proposals, Muni Working Group, Information Technology, the parking control officers. So let me be very clear about this. The policies and the programs are going to come forward to the board on the 21st, absolutely maintained. The dollar amount and the timing of implementation will change, and we will cover that on the 21st. So today we want to cover the policies and the programs which we will build into the budget. We may need to make adjustments on timing and hiring and implementation based on the current economic shock and what we anticipate to be a downturn in future years. So I just want to make that very clear as I close this particular section. So next is just an update on the budget itself. Next slide. So again, we are generally at a balanced budget On slide 13, the budget at 1.3 billion, 1.343 billion. The first thing I would like you to note on this slide is that the budget between the two fiscal years actually did not grow all that much. We were pretty stable between the 2 years, even if you consider CPI and you consider salary growth. We were already, flexing our muscles with regard to what we could fund with regard to the policies and programs we had already included. I will tell you that on the 21st, this will go down, but not as much as you will think, and I will explain that. So we are working on shifting timing of implementation of programs, maybe being a little more efficient with some of our internal operations. We have built all of that into the budget, and so we will again on the 21st have a balanced budget implementing the policies and programs that we have been talking about for 3 months now, and based on the actual feedback we have received from the public since January. So again, we have integrated what we have heard from the public and from all the outreach that we have had. We have taken your feedback and adjusted the budget appropriately. Now, again, we are going into the final numbers job of balancing the budget and making it an implementable program. The next slide covers, again, the various funding sources. You'll see we get down to the individual dashes, so the various sources there. What I will tell you now is we have looked at all funding sources in fiscal year 21 and 22. We did go through a process looking at all recessions back to 1948 to make a projection of what we think a recessionary scenario would look like. Again, to remind the board, we did present a recession scenario to you in January at $158 million revenue loss over 2 years. That was based on modeling the 2009 financial downturn. When we did our updated analysis, we considered different types of economic downturns, and those specifically brought on by a shock to the economy, which I will talk about shortly. So we do expect a number of our revenue sources to drop. However, the operating grant line that you see there, we do anticipate increasing to offset the losses on our enterprise business lines, which we've discussed before, and a reduction in the general fund set aside. We have accounted for new numbers from the controller's office, and we have taken the worst case scenario into account. The next slide shows just the expenditures. Again, trying to work towards a balanced budget. So there will be some minor adjustments to the budget brought on April 21st. Again, maintaining the policies and the programs with some workarounds with regard to the numbers. The next slide, again, is just a summary of the various programs that were included. So these are the expenditure increases that we expect over the next few years. I do want to stress yet again that when we discussed the budget on the 17th, a core component of it was building the foundation for future growth, that it was based on investing in things now in anticipation of a new revenue source. So that plan generally holds that a lot of these investments were to build a foundation for the future. Now it's about building and having that foundation in place for the economic recovery we know will eventually come. So the next slide quickly covers, again, HR 748. So again, typo on my part, at least I was consistent in the typo, and where we are currently. So I do want to give the public and even our own team at the MTA a sense that we are looking at things right now. We are actively looking at what happens next. So there is a shock to the economy going on right now. And so in the current fiscal year, we have put controls in place. So I'm on the next slide, slide 18. That includes reductions in unscheduled overtime, which Director Tumlin has announced to the employees. We are creating, and we intended to anyway, a very detailed hiring plan. So we will carefully look at the period and time of positions. So as an example, we want civil service lists to be developed because those take a significant amount of months, but we will account for the salary as to when we expect that person to actually start. We are focusing on those positions that are service critical. So we're looking at holding or reserving for a quarter or two positions that we expect not to start immediately. We're taking all of those things into account to balance the final budget. We're also looking at reductions in purchases of non-critical services and supplies. So we are confident now, based on what we know from MTC, that we will likely get close to including these fiscal controls break even in fiscal year 20. So this gets to how we will manage revenues and expenditures, which is what we talked about in March, even before all of this. We had a plan in place to deal with this situation. Director Tumlin talked about resiliency, and I've been told I'm optimistic, but I feel that we have prepared for this situation, and we will give you extensive detail on April 21st to give you comfort in approving the budget. Slide 19 covers the specific scenarios. So again, we did look at recessions back to 1948. We have applied those scenarios. We have looked at our current revenue losses. So the economic shock in the current fiscal year, we do anticipate roughly $195 to maybe $210 million revenue loss. This is based on actual data, and we do update it weekly based on actual data we're getting in, but this is the loss that we anticipate. With regard to an economic downturn and the period of that, we modeled our work very much after the Controller's Office. I actually think we were more conservative in some cases than the Controller's Office in extent and period of a particular downturn. So we're definitely assuming it will go through calendar year 2021, which takes you roughly into part of fiscal year 22. So at least for a good 60% of the budgetary period that we will be talking about. The revenue loss, and we have numerous different scenarios. We're going with one pretty conservative that we'll cover with you again on the 21st, but it's a revenue loss, again, depending on the economy, of between 100 and roughly $210 million. So again, that's revising our economic downturn model from 158 million to now a maximum of a $210 million loss in the fiscal year 21 and 22 period. So we have planned that and projected that, and it is in the updated budget that will come forward to you on April 21st. So then the question is, how do we close that? So that's the next slide, slide 20. So again, HR 748 was the CARES Act, and so it did pass. It provides $25 billion appropriated in the current federal fiscal year based on standard formulas to transit agencies across the United States. Costs are eligible back to January 1st, 2020. So again, this allows us to close our fiscal gap in the current fiscal year. In the bill, both the local match, which is typically 20%, and the requirement that we be in the transportation improvement plan within the MTC region, those were waived. So once we get the programmed amount from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC, we will be able to put in a grant to the FTA and start offsetting our costs in the current year. The Bay Area itself, the next slide, slide 21. The Bay Area itself expects to get roughly $1.3 billion from this transit relief bill due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. We're expecting the first action on that to be this month, probably almost around the same period of the budget adoption, likely in that exact same week. We are working with MTC and the transit agencies within the region on the formula. Director Tumlin may want to add on to that after I'm done with this presentation, but we expect somewhere, I'm going to say now, between like $170 to $200 million in the first tranche of funding, which again will close that projected gap we have. The second tranche or allocation of funds will happen sometime in the summer. And based on many different factors that MTC has used, we can generally project that we would get somewhere between $130 and $200 million again. We have included that in the budget. We have been conservative with our estimated number, but this is how we will close that gap. We still will have a minor deficit that we are working to close through, again, timing and some cost controls. We were going to be in that situation anyway, and we put the infrastructure in place to implement that operating program. But we will cover all that in detail and make sure that the board feels comfortable approving the budget, agreeing to and supporting the policies and programs that are going to be within it. So the last slide just covers kind of our next steps. So today we're covering both the CIP and giving a fiscal status on where we are with the state of the agency's finances. On the 21st, again, we're hoping to get approval of the consolidated budget, both operating and capital budgets, and approval of our 5-year capital improvement program. There is likely going to be an extended budget period with the Board of Supervisors through October. So our budget will be submitted as normal. It will be interim in nature, likely from the summer until October when it will become adopted. We will, as part of the updated budget on April 21st, recommend that during this interim period, we not incur new expenses. So things that we did expect to start July 1st, we will likely recommend delaying 1 quarter, which again, reduce costs and helps us balance that budget overall. So that is my presentation on this situation. And again, I'm happy to take questions.
Mr. Chairman, would you like to go to public comment on the budget at this point?
Yes, please.
All right. Thank you. If we can ask members of the public who wish to address the board on the operating and capital budgets, if you could please dial 10 now. When it is your turn to speak,
Your conference is now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0.
All right. So first speaker, please. As soon as you start talking, I'll turn the microphone on. Turn the timer on, and you will have 2 minutes.
You have 3 questions remaining.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. First caller, please.
Hi, my name is Alex Canarella. I'm speaking on behalf of Tony DeLorio, president of Teamsters Local 665, in reference to the letter that was submitted earlier to Director Tumlin. Mr. Tumlin, in an effort to stabilize employment anticipated to ramp up following the end of the COVID-19 shutdown, we ask for your review of pending contracts scheduled to be out to bid in the coming months. These include off-street parking, SFMTA facilities, tow services, parking meter collection, and parking meter repair. Each of these services have a Teamster union complement of public and private sector workers, most of whom are long-term employees. And the vast majority are presently laid off during this emergency shutdown. Additionally, for consideration, bidding, vetting, and replacing these contractors will cost millions of dollars during a time when city resources are slated to be stretched thin. Alternatively, fixed costs of a stabilized contractor base and workforce will bring steady revenue and assured savings. As Teamster representatives, we are requesting stability of return to work after the post-COVID-19 shutdown. Continuing and extending these contracts for all the mentioned sectors for an additional 24 months will go far in facilitating full employment and services. Hundreds of our members have enjoyed working for these SFMTA sectors for many years, and they look forward to doing so after their return to work. The knowledge that their employers will be there for the foreseeable future will be welcome news to their families. Thank you for your review. And
30 seconds. All right, thank you. Next caller, please.
You have 2 questions remaining.
Okay, caller, we will start your 2 minutes when you state your name and start talking.
My name is PJ, and I'm with Tomken. With the crisis we are facing, why is SFMTA still want to raise fares? We have been saying that we don't need another fare increase. We don't want any increase on all payment options. We know that all our working class families are already struggling even before COVID-19. And if SFMTA are going to raise the fare, it will be a big burden for families that are trying to get back on track. Fare increase will only lead to decrease in ridership. In our experience, fare increase doesn't mean improvement and reliability because we haven't seen improvements for years, and we don't need to talk about reliability. Please support working class families by not raising the fare on all payment options. We already dropped off 1,400 postcards and signatures stating that we don't need fare increase. Please acknowledge those postcards and signature because those are the voices of students, working class, and low-income families that utilize Muni as their only options for transportation. We don't need fare increase on all payment options. Yesterday, the no fare increase resolution by Dean Preston got passed in Land Use and Transportation Committee. Please look into that. SF thrives because of working class and low income families. No fare increase on all payment options, especially during this pandemic and very tough times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
You have 2 questions remaining.
Hello. As soon as you start talking, we will set
Chair
your timer.
Heineke, thank you. Alita Dupree here for the record on item 12. I have been looking at the pages 4 and 5, and we have this thing called Equity Clipper, but I really fail to see how it promotes equity, because I am a person of modest means, and I use Clipper really for several reasons. One is I get a discount, which I need to watch my pennies. 2, it's also a safer, registered way for me to pay my fare. And as people with disabilities tend to be of lower income, I feel it necessary that the Lifeline and the reduced fare monthly passes should be the same. I'm also concerned when I read here on page 4 about eliminating a Clipper differential for passports. It doesn't make clear what direction the Clipper fare will go, but if we want to encourage people to use Clipper in its safe registered format, I'm asking myself why we're still selling paper passports. I remember the days in New York City subway when they had tokens, and they had to get away from that, and they're going to get rid of the paper Metro cards. So I think if we really want to advance equity, we want to bring all of our communities together.
30 seconds.
To be able to participate in the Clipper program, and they can pay their fares in their community by loading their Clipper cards instead of having to be tied only to going to the vending machines and to the ticket booths. So selling paper passports is a really expensive way to do business. So not having seen a staff report, some of this is confusing. I do support fare capping. I think fare capping should go on to Clipper as well.
Speaker, thank you. Your time is up.
Thank you very much.
Next caller, please.
Not to have to agonize.
You have
Ms.
2
Dupree?
questions remaining.
Your time is expired. Thank you so much, as always, for your
Hi, this is
participation.
Stephen Miller. I was just calling to say that as we still have a discount on Clipper, just making sure that Clipper is accessible in neighborhoods outside of the general downtown core, which might include putting ticket vending machines at surface light rail platforms and rapid bus stops. And then also in regards to the day pass becoming available on the fare box, I think that's a great idea, but also making it available on Clipper. You guys have said a lot about, we need to wait until the next generation, but BTA and AC Transit already have day passes on Clipper. So
Thank you, Mr. Miller, as always. Ms. Boomer, any other speakers?
You have 1 question remaining.
All right, member of the public, when you start talking, please state your name. We will start your time.
Hi, my name is Isabel Teig, and I'm a student at USF and an intern with SOMCAN. It is clear that this pandemic will have unprecedented rippling economic effects at the national, state, and local level. According to Governor Newsom on March 31st, 1.6 million state residents had applied for unemployment insurance since the beginning of COVID-19 shelter in place, with a single-day record of more than 150,000 people filing on March 30th. This number will continue to rise as people struggle to pay rent, medical bills, tuition, and put food on the table. The income inequality we see every day in San Francisco will only be exacerbated by COVID-19. The necessity of an equitable fare policy becomes even more apparent in the wake of this global pandemic, and I urge the board not to increase fares in any capacity. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Boomer, anyone else?
You have 0 questions remaining.
Thank you. If you would please close public comment.
Moderator has deactivated public comment.
Mr. Chair, you're free to proceed with the meeting.
Very good. Director Heminger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jonathan, I just wanted to check a couple of numbers with you. It would appear to me that your revenue estimate of losses over the 3 fiscal years is about 350 to 400 million, which almost matches exactly the amount of funds that you expect to get out of the MTC process over the next several months. Isn't that right?
Your math is very close to correct.
That's because he eats his peas.
Well, colleagues, Speaker Pelosi often makes the point that she prays for our president, and I think we all ought to say a little prayer for her because these federal funds really are saving the day at Muni, at a whole lot of other places. And I certainly want to applaud her leadership in securing those funds for us and for transit agencies around the country. Jonathan, just one further question, because you indicated when you presented your slide on how you were going to deal with the reserve balance that there might be some changes coming. But based upon what we just agreed to, it doesn't sound to me like we need to eat very far into that 10% operating reserve, do we?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So as of now, and things are changing hourly. They have been for the past 2 weeks. As of now, the $130 million reserve will be maintained. So we are not projecting that you would need to use that in the next 2 fiscal years. So it will still be available if things get worse than our downturn projection. So that's the first thing. We are going to make a couple other technical adjustments. So we would likely recommend that we maximize out the federal grant we get in year 1 and not use any of the fund balance to balance the operating budget in fiscal year 21. Instead, use it in fiscal year 22 and wait and see how the economy goes. So if we get those federal dollars, it will likely be expected that we use them as quickly as possible. So we should max out what we'll get in 21 and not use our own fund balance, try to reserve that if there's an extended recession into fiscal year 22. So that's one technical adjustment we're going to recommend.
Yeah, my CFO at MTC used to say, always spend other people's money first. So I like your strategy. Thank you.
I'm also, well, Jonathan is perhaps more optimistic than I am about how the COVID-19 health crisis will affect the economy. I'm glad that Jonathan is preparing for recession and has looked at past recessions. I'm concerned that this is an unprecedented economic event since 1918. And my task is to make sure that our workforce is not impacted. So I am being much more conservative in my judgment than Jonathan, and I respect his work in holding on to that reserve fund because I'm concerned that we are going to need to use it in order to hold on to jobs.
Very good. Thank you. Director Eakin.
Thank you. A couple of questions for you, Jonathan. On slide 19, the 3 scenarios, just confirming so the 195 to 220 million, that's the loss for FY20. That's projected for just a little bit over 3 months, the last quarter of the fiscal year. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Could you share any more detail in terms of the assumptions that you're making when you're generating these 3 scenarios?
Yes, so we are looking weekly at, we actually just started because March just closed, looking at what we got in March 2019 and what we got today. But generally the approach is, we know, and Director Tumlin can add to this, like ridership and fare revenue is down like 90%. It's non-existent. So this is why it's important to look at now as an economic shock. We are just not doing business. We are making zero. The same is true largely on meter and parking revenues. I mean, we're down like 85, 95%, and we can actually look at the data and see what we're getting week by week. So this is why that range is kind of shrinking in that first box, because as we get more data every week, we can be much more precise about what our revenue losses are. So we're just not making anything. So we know what we're supposed to make, and then we're assuming 80 to 90% losses because that's what we're seeing. The things, we just got a general fund update from the controller's office last week. So we have since updated that. We have assumed the worst case scenario loss in our general fund set aside from the city. So that is baked into that equation. The thing that's outstanding is largely our operating grants from the state, which is a huge part of our budget. We still don't know if the state will true us up using their own reserves. We're certainly advocating, for example, on the state transit assistance grant, that the state at least follow through with what it committed. Transit agencies get that funding. It's the sales tax on diesel fuel. So usually you would think that's stable, but right now, like, sales taxes are crashing, diesel fuel and oil is crashing. So that's the largest funding source that backs that. That we can't predict. We can just use a general, like, how bad do we think it will be? And we don't know what state advocacy will bring. So we're pretty confident about the losses in the current year.
So as an example, you're assuming the current ridership and revenue and parking revenue losses, what we're experiencing now, you're just assuming that exact same sort of scenario all the way out to the end of June. Is that kind of what's informing these numbers?
Yes, it assumes to the end of June.
Yeah.
Yes, we don't see a dip. So my boss thought I was not conservative enough in the first round. So we are not even assuming a dip back up until after June. So this is like down until June.
Okay, great. And then finally, could you just remind us what are the eligible uses for that transit funding that we're going to be receiving through the stimulus?
Yes, so the federal legislature used the existing 5207 formula. So that's an existing transit federal grant for the purposes of transit service. So it can be used for transit operating costs. So we have to look at ourselves purely as a transit agency. And so typically that component of our budget is roughly around $900 million. So it can be used to offset those costs.
Okay. Director Torres.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Jonathan, one of the most important issues that we're facing in the near term is the cost of healthcare. I'm one of the 5 members of the board of Covered California, and we received some very sobering information, but I don't see that reflected in your estimates in terms of benefits for employees. We now project about 40% increase in healthcare premiums, and probably what we're going to end up spending on COVID-19 treatment for patients in California will equal what we spend per year on everything else in our budget for healthcare. So where are you figuring in the projected cost of what we're going to have to confront for our employees?
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. So what we can show you today is what we think we're going to lose on the revenue side. Your question gets directly to the expense side. So the last time we showed you an economic downturn model, we had the revenue loss of roughly 158 million. And maybe some of you will remember, we also had increased retirement and other contributions that went up in that period of another 40 million, making it 200 million total. We are making adjustments for the cost of fringe and healthcare benefits, assuming increased retirement contributions. So we are working with the controller's office now to figure out what that expenditure hit will be. Again, I am attempting to be conservative in our revenue losses. The final budget that will come to you will be less than the 1.3 billion. We will have to cut back certain things, but those expenses, we are working with the controller's office right now to make sure we are accounting for those fully in the budget over the next 2 years. Good catch.
Very good. Does that answer the question, Art?
I suppose so for the time being. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Director Borden?
Related to the question about fares and just the economic outlook, are we looking at the issue around social distancing? I mean, not only might we have a decline in ridership, but it seems to me that the virus will not be gone after any time that we leave shelter in place. I don't know if there's been any talks about whether or not we will have to continue some degree of social distancing within public spaces, and how we look at being able to deploy that and maintain levels of service. So I don't know if I was just wondering if your economic model was taking that into place, not just into consideration, not just the decline in riders, but the need to augment service significantly to meet the need while providing social distancing.
Yes. So in the shock model, the shock model is like, we're just not doing business. We are making zero because there's just no activity. In the economic model of a recession, it's actually, believe it or not, for those of you who have been on the board for a long period of time, our enterprise, a lot through this budget, we've talked about our enterprise revenues and the general fund support that we get. And we've talked about how we've been more apt to an economic downturn because we've become so much dependent on those sources. In the last downturn, our enterprise revenues typically stay pretty stable. However, we did account for the fact that where we are going to take the biggest hit and the slowest recovery will be on transit fare revenue. We think that we did account, especially for the first 6 to 8 months of fiscal year 21, that's probably where we're going to lose the most. That's probably where we do lose the most in our updated revenues that you'll see on the 21st. And the period of recovery of that is extended much further than a lot of our other things. Like, as an example, to that point, fewer people will ride transit, but more people might tend to drive cars on their own because they do want to keep social distancing. So we think that parking revenues will probably recover pretty quickly, and we're going to be implementing the program of extended meter hours to account for that. So we've taken those things into account, and yes, we do assume that fare revenue and that social distancing will continue for an extended period late into 2020, probably early 2021.
That's right. And we're continuing to look at what is happening in particularly cities like Taipei, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Seoul, the places that have had the greatest success in flattening the curve, and seeing what they are doing both to keep that curve going down and also to not allow for new increases. And in some ways, they are learning from San Francisco's experience in the AIDS crisis about factors like the critical importance of testing. So if we can let people know that they are asymptomatic but COVID positive, we could start accommodating a greater amount of self-quarantine and also lift travel restrictions, right? So the way to get people back to work is to know that they're not COVID positive or that they have the COVID antibodies. We're hopeful that we can learn from the East Asian cities that were hit first, and to learn from their successes and to avoid their failures, just as we've done in the last 6 weeks.
So I guess you're saying we're going to also invest in some testing so that we can test our employees?
We are so grateful for Mayor London Breed's announcement yesterday that the city employee testing site that's been set up on the piers, that our frontline workers are going to start to be eligible for that testing, starting with our bus operators this week, followed by our parking control officers and other frontline workers next week. That should help us to be able to bring back our workforce and start to restore Muni bus service, both by increasing confidence that our operators are safe, but also having to send fewer of our workforce home for quarantine in order to provide an abundance of caution that our workforce isn't spreading unknowingly the COVID virus.
And I would assume for now that funding comes out of some other source and not our budget. So
that's right. That's right. So this is, again, it's a way that the city departments are partnering with each other in order to support each other. The city's Emergency Operations Center has taught city departments to collaborate with each other to be more efficient and more helpful, looking after the entire city family rather than just our own individual budget bottom lines. Just as we're continuing to invest in service to make sure that other departments, essential workers, can get to work.
Very good. Okay. Any other directors have questions for Jeff or Jonathan? I don't see any coming in on my electric board. So I will say, Jonathan, thank you as always for a wonderful presentation. I think you've very much captured the direction. It wasn't always unanimous, but the direction that you got from the board in the last few meetings, and I appreciate that. I am appreciative also of the extra effort to accommodate the taxi industry, which was reeling to begin with and is certainly reeling more now that folks are avoiding all forms of transit, but I would imagine particularly taxi transit as well. And hopefully that will at least help them stay on their feet and come back a little bit with the accommodation we've made there. The one question I had for you pertains to the fund balance. I saw the slide that suggests even under your projections, we will stay well on the right side of the 10% mandate or the 10% guidance for our fund balance, and I appreciate that. But I also see in there fund balance being used for some things which are no doubt necessary, but my question is, do we have the ability to defer some of them? For example, parking meter rehabilitation and some of the other things that are there for fund balance use. My sense of it is that these are commitments that we can make now that will not all be spent and used immediately, such that if we find ourselves in a situation that service cuts, that that Speaker Pelosi and others haven't not fully come to the rescue, and we need to reprioritize our fund balance usage to preserve service, that we would have the flexibility as a board to do that down the line.
Yeah, you are correct, and that is a correct assumption. So as I told Director Tumlin, he's managing the crisis today, and I need to worry about recovery tomorrow. And so we are generating, and we can cover in more detail, a very detailed operational budget management plan that we will implement to, again, give you all confidence that we will go through quarterly reviews of expenditures. And if we are not hitting our revenue marks, we will start prioritizing and making different decisions about those policies and programs we turn on. So you are correct. If we are going through a procurement process to get a new parking meter vendor to replace the meters, clearly we would not spend the entire $22 million in year one. We probably wouldn't even spend maybe the majority of it in year two. If we need that cash to balance the budget, just like we manage our capital projects, we will do that, and we will use those dollars to do that. So we will shift, and one of the tools we will use will be to manage to cash flow. And we actually have done that this year, and we can cover it in more detail on the 21st.
Okay, so I will support this as you've laid it out, and I'm glad we've maintained the fund balance that we have for this rainy day, and that's a sort of a message to the folks who will be serving on this board for a long time as a good practice of corporate governance. I will say when we first began these discussions, before we really knew the extent of this virus and the associated impact, we were talking about using the fund balance for some things and having the discussion of, well, there may be a rainy day coming. Well, that rainy day is obviously here now. So I will, like I said, support this, but I will request that we keep an eye on that, because I don't really want to be in a situation where we get below the 10%. I think that can have a very significant effect on our ability to borrow, the price of borrowing, and I think it sends a real message as to where we are as an agency. And so I like the fact that we have a little bit of a cushion, but I'm taking your word that you're gonna monitor this, and if we get to the point where there's critical service cuts that need to be had to balance the budget, I'd rather reprioritize some of this fund balance to avoid that.
Understood.
Okay. Anyone else with comments on this item? Again, I think we're in a non-voting situation because we have one more meeting on this. All right. That would take us to, unless we go to the to the closed session right now, it would take us to item number 9. Ms. Boomer, are you okay proceeding to item number 9 before we go to closed session?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that would be appropriate. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on matters that are within the jurisdiction of the board, but not on today's agenda. So members of the public who wish to address the board, please dial 10.
Your conference is now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0.
The moderator will let us know if there are members of the public who wish to address the board. If you wish to address the board, please dial 10.
There are no members of the public who wish to address the board.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Chair, there is no one who wishes to address, so if you would like, we will close public comment.
Okay, so that closes public comment and ends item 9, and we will move into closed session now. Well, do I need a vote to move into closed session? Is that
Yes,
correct?
Mr. Chair, and that will need to be a roll call.
Roll call vote. Okay,
Yes.
so can I get a motion and a second to move into closed session, please?
So move.
Okay.
Second.
All right, so would you call the roll on that? And directors, after this roll call vote, we'll take a 3-minute break while this is set up, and just to give everybody a chance to get a glass of water or whatever.
And Mr. Chair, just for the record, before you take this vote, and a lot of noise. Okay, and convene the closed session. The board is going to report out on the closed session, include reporting on any action taken in closed session and a motion to disclose or not disclose the information discussed at the beginning of its next meeting, either on April 21st or if it doesn't meet that day at the next meeting. So after you convene the closed session, we'll ask board members to exit this meeting and then join the closed session meeting that is on your calendar. I will now read the roll with regard to invoking the attorney-client privilege and convening the closed session. Director Borden.
Aye.
Borden, aye. Director Brinkman.
Sorry, aye.
Thank you. Brinkman, aye. Director Eakin.
Aye.
Eakin, aye. Director Heineke.
Aye.
Heineke, aye. Director Hemminger.
Aye.
Hemminger, aye. Director Rubke.
Aye.
Rubke, aye. Director Torres.
Aye.
Torres, aye. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum, and so the board will now go into the closed session.
Okay, and so your instructions to us all are to hang up this call, essentially click the red phone button, and then go to the calendar item that we have, which is the closed session, and separately log into that meeting.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Does anyone have questions on that before we can always email you, but all right. So if
Roberta, you may need to change the Outlook invitation so that we can start the meeting early. It's not scheduled until 4:30.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so look for that, folks, and please log in within the next, let's say, 5 minutes. Be well, and to the members of the public who are watching, thank you for accommodating this unique format and for showing the resilient city that we are. All right, thank you. We will move into closed session.
SFGovTV, San Francisco Government Television.